nothing.
Look at item number 1. Come on. You're done. Come on, I'm gonna try to make it a little bit. I need a little bit left, I can tell. Does anybody else want to sign in on the sign-in sheet to speak tonight? If you didn't sign in, you'd like to, please come on up here and we'll have you sign up. Okay, I'm going to start momentarily. We had thank you. We had an academic standards meeting going on, so the board is just coming from that, although I noticed the chairman has made it here on time. That's fine.
Dress code. I want a dress code.
Mrs. Thomas says tuxes for Saturday morning.
Black tie. Black tie.
Couple things on Saturday while we're waiting to start this week. Can we get a board to write on?
They would have a tie, has done it in.
I just asked you what we were doing Saturday.
You want a whiteboard?
Yes, a white, not a white, like a paper that we can flip. We can write things on, like a flip chart. Yes. What are those things called? Looks like, sounds like.
Experience chart.
Flip chart. Thank you. My brain is not a.
Yeah. You got that
Okay.
one? Yeah, flip chart. They should be next door.
We'll,
So mark.
and yeah, we can talk about a few other things afterwards. Thank you, sir. Okay. I'm going to call this meeting to order. It's a meeting of the public session of the Council Rock School Board of School Directors. This meeting is being recorded by the Council Rock School District and may be recorded by members of the audience. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lambert. You seem to have some rogue board members haven't made their way to the table. Can we start with roll call, please?
Mr. Abramson?
Here.
Mrs. Brooks?
Here.
Mr. Bialik?
Mr.
Please.
Bialik has a family obligation this evening.
Okay. Dr. Foster?
Here.
Yes, I have them.
And Mr. Grupp?
Mr. Grupp is in the building.
Okay. And I know Ms. McKessie is
In
coming
the
back
building.
shortly. Mrs. Sexton?
Present.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
And Mr. Block?
Here.
Superintendent's report, Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. Just some announcements with respect to the board's business. The Board of School Directors will meet in special session on Saturday, September 20th, beginning at 9 o'clock a.m. here at Chancellor Center to continue our discussion on capital planning. Special meetings of the Board of School Director on the issue of capital planning have now been scheduled. The first meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 9th at 7:30 p.m. at Council Rock South, and the second meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 23rd at 7:30 p.m. at Newtown Middle School. Richboro Elementary School invites students, families, and staff to celebrate their 25th anniversary on Tuesday, September 30th. The celebration will be part of a picnic dinner from 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. at Richboro Elementary School, BYOPD. Bring your own picnic dinner. For more information, visit the Richboro Elementary School website. The Council Rock Community Aquatics Program is now open for fall registration. Please check information on programs and registration at their website, which is www.crsd.org/aquatics. Please mark your calendars with the dates for this year's Raising Great Kids Community Speaker Series. Last year's speaker series was amazing. This year's promises to be even better. Presented by the Council Rock Coalition for Healthy Youth and the Council Rock Education Foundation, this series features 5 programs on the important issues facing our children today and provides practical advice on how adults can help them prepare for and deal with issues including student stress, smartphones and social media safety, and substance abuse prevention. Based on feedback from last year's attendees, this year's series is also introducing a community conversations event featuring small group discussions on a variety of issues that parents have requested. All events are free and will include time for a question and answer, so please plan to attend and join in the conversation. Visit the Council Rock Education Foundation's website at www.creducationfoundation.org for more information and to register.
Thank you, Mr. Klein.
Nope, I have one more, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was thinking for the last one. And finally, I just simply want to address some issues that have come up regarding our schools and their involvement in the discussion on capital planning. Our schools are first and foremost environments for teaching and learning. They are not places for advocacy for any of the issues that are arising in our public meetings right now for capital planning. Principals, teachers, and other staff cannot be placed in positions where their comments or advocacy would somehow compromise or contradict the work of our board. Rather, our administrators have been instructed by myself to keep their schools neutral on these issues and to promote instead the strong learning environment that we hear about so often in our public comment. Rest assured that every principal and teacher I've asked would be a tireless advocate for his or her school. However, we first serve a larger enterprise, a K-12 school system comprised of 11,000 students, 1,400 staff, and over 70,000 community members. So I simply ask that members of our community who are advocating for the various facets of these plans understand and respect the instructions that we have handed to our school administrators. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment? Public comment is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board. We'd ask that you limit your comments to no longer than 3 minutes. Please consider the fact that there may be young children watching this broadcast on CRTV. It is our goal to maintain a respectful environment so that members of the community have an equal opportunity to address the board without interruption. While the board welcomes your ideas and will consider them in deliberating an issue, we may not respond to your comments or questions. I have 2 sign-in sheets, so I'm going to start with the first one. Stephanie.
Barriotaris.
Thank you.
It's not easy to spell or to pronounce.
That's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to my comments tonight. I'm Stephanie Barriotaris. I'm the parent of 3 children who've been through the Council Rock District over the past 10 years. And my comments tonight are directed toward the capital plan and specifically with regard to the proposed closing of elementary schools. I am an economist by training. I do health economics for a living. And I had the opportunity to read through the report by the Pennsylvania Economic League, which of course was the basis for the projections on enrollment by which the capital plan or the committee put forth its recommendations. And I want to register a concern with the school board and with the administration tonight with regard to that report. As we all, those of us who are involved in forecasting know, it's a very difficult business. But my specific concern with their approach to how they looked at future enrollment is that they took a very, well, I'm going to say flawed approach in terms of looking at historical data from the past 12 years. We all know historical data cannot accurately predict what's going forward, and the specific concern I have is the economic cycle that was not taken into account. So I'm going to speak to one particular issue in that report, and it had to do with birth rates, right? Birth rates was a key component of the projections that they made. For those of you who might be familiar with some of the economic data, there's a well-established correlation between economic output, things like GDP, per capita income, et cetera, and birth rates. So not surprisingly, birth rates fell in the U.S. following the 2008 downturn. In fact, they've begun to level off, and if historical data from previous recessions and quite frankly, the Great Depression is an indicator for the future, birth rates are going to increase going forward. And in fact, I looked at data just today from the Pew Research Center that shows this exact conclusion, and I'd be happy to share that with the board. So I would like you to take into account the fact that there is a very high probability birth rates and the real estate market will look very different 4 years hence. This is the headline from today's Bloomberg News reports. The Dow and the S&P set new highs as the Fed-driven rally continues, and the U.S. jobless claim fell And in fact, continuing claims, which it would be a good thing if they go down, hit the lowest point since 2007. So I would like you all to reconsider the projections which were done by this Pennsylvania Economic League, and to consider economic cycles and what might be ahead in the next 5 years or so as the economy continues to recover. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Farling?
Hi. Good evening. I'm Ed Farling, Hudson Court in Holland, PA. I was honored to be a part of the Citizens Planning Committee, and we looked at a large number of factors, well beyond just the enrollment numbers and the ups and downs there. We looked at the Schrader report on optimizing the existing footprint of the school buildings, and even doing those extensive renovations, you will not be able to get rid of all the trailers. In short, the district is in for some level of new construction, no matter what, if the only goal is to get rid of the trailers. And I'll use my school here, Rolling Hills, as an example. That building will require 3 separate major capital outlays to get to that standard and other district standards here. The first one would be the renovations to get it optimized, inside that existing footprint. It needs another significant capital expenditure to, just modernize the physical plant per the capital expenditure requirements that are coming up. And it is one of the buildings that will not be able to get rid of every trailer just by optimizing the interior space. So there will be some construction cost for that as well. The questions of closing or consolidating elementary schools is not just about the enrollment numbers, and it's about making the best use of every tax dollar and what we get for the money. Spending the money to expand another elementary school or 2 and consolidate Rolling Hills into it buys us additional operational administrative savings. Spending it on a newer and slightly larger Rolling Hills does not. The money can only be spent once. Asking as a taxpayer and a resident that it be spent wisely. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Oberhal? Oberhal, sorry.
Do I press this or do I press that? Okay, I figured it out. Heather Oberhal from Wrightstown. I just wanted to follow up on some of the information I presented last week. My numbers I remembered well. I actually further narrowed the search to single-family condo, mobile home, and multifamily homes, 3+ bedrooms. And the percentages came out almost exactly as what they were when I ran just the general report. That included farms and vacant land. So 40+ years, we have 4% in Wrightstown. 30 to 40 years, we have 5%. 20 to 30 years owned, 11%. When you go down to Newtown, you see the percentages go to 1%, 4%, 16. When I saw the 16, I just went into that a little bit further. I know that's because of housing. We had a housing boom at that point, a lot of new construction. So if you look at the next table, it shows you the year, how many new construction units we brought into the township, how many of those units are owned by the original owners, their percentage, and the number of units previously listed on the MLS. I just found it interesting as I was looking through, just because there were a number of homes that popped up that they had been previously listed or they are currently listed. So this number of people have tried to sell their home or in the process of trying to sell their home. And there was something else I wanted to point out. Oh, the 35 number. I expected that to be larger than the 39 or the 38 because it's a 10-year span instead of a 5-year span. When I looked further into those units, there was a lot of the condos and the townhomes that are off of Mill Pond, and I would expect those original owners are probably using those as investment properties at this time. We have a secondary pressure on the housing market right now, and that's the millennials. So this is the largest generation in history. They graduated with $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 in debt, and they are living in their parents' basement, and that's not a joke. It's a statistical reality. And we have seen about half the housing bust and ensuing recession disrupted household formation, reducing it to about half the normal level. They are poised to come into the real estate market in the next 10 years, and the Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies projected that millennials will make up 24 million new households between 2015 and 2025. So if we look at the mature housing and the millennial generation, the Pell report states in there that it's particularly sensitive to the turnover of mature housing. It says that in the February 2013 update. So if we look at that framed in the housing market and what we see in our mature housing and the millennials ready to join into the market, if we look at our capacity report, the total seats versus our September 8th enrollment and our available seats, where's our tolerance? So we're looking at this bubble. Our best case scenario using peak enrollment, we have 63 available seats, and that's for Newtown Township, Newtown Borough, Upper Makefield Township, and Wrightstown Township if we go down to 3 schools. If we use our existing use, we go down to 3. If I could just take 2 more seconds. A quick comment, I think the conversation changed last week. Before that, it was Wrightstown was going to Newtown. This is what everybody was running with because it was the recommendation. Wrightstown was going to Newtown. We were going to bump 50 people from Newtown, and we were going to move as a school to a new school. I think the conversation changed. There's pockets of 100 kids at each of those 3 schools, and the only logical, functional way to access that available capacity, I think, is for a complete redistricting. And if that's the conversation, then you need to draw the lines, and you need to let South Finestone people know, and Newtown and Good know, because they see Wrightstown and they think they're in the clear, and they're not. So draw the lines, and let's tell them what the schools are going to look like, because they're not going to be 663 kids. They're going to be 858 kids. So the lines are going to change, and the schools themselves are going to be very different than what they are in now. And I would ask that before you vote on anything, you really let us know, where is my kid going to be next year, and how many kids are going to be in that school. Thank you so much for letting me go over time.
Thank you. Adrian Vance.
Hello, Adrian Vance here for Wrightstown. I stand before the school board once again, not as a parent, but also a member of the Council Rock community and as a taxpayer. Over the last few meetings, I've seen emotions flood both sides of the room. I've been pleased at times and impressed with the professionalism that's been needed for this process. However, there has been disheartening moments when it's clear that unbiased voice and logic is drowned out by single-minded thinking. Nevertheless, the intention should be what is best for our district. With that said, yet once again, I have to restate, how are these proposals following the best business practice for decision making? A model that's been proven effective that covers all aspects of safety, quality, cost, delivery, scheduling, and finally morale. Our own superintendent has made recommendations based on actual numbers, not numbers that were proposed many months ago when 3 committees were generous enough to work on their proposals with the tools they had at the time. However, with more current information, it has become clear that some parts of the different proposals will no longer function as they were originally suggested and intended to. That updated information also continues to raise questions that need to be properly addressed when a decision-making model is used. First off is safety. With any increase of bus travel time on the roads, there is an also increase of the likelihood of accidents to occur. How is busing our children to farther schools going to improve their safety? Secondly, by relocating our children to schools that will be approaching or will be at 100% capacity with the addition, how are we keeping our students safer in a situation that has just become more crowded for everyone? More people occupying one space has been proven to lead to more accidents. Not to mention that if projections are off with a full capacity already, we will be faced with a form of overcrowding with the slightest unplanned increase in the population. The next point in the decision-making process is quality. Wrightstown Elementary is the only school in Council Rock School District to receive the National Blue Ribbon Award not once, but twice. In every known business practices, companies emulate the other companies that have shown proven success. Following that point, how are we improving the quality of education by closing a school that has produced time and again success above the expected standards? Not to mention, what message are we sending to schools, not only locally but nationwide, about our concern for quality when we close our nationally recognized award winner? With only the first 2 out of 5 parts of the decision-making model producing so many concerns and questions, it would be irresponsible and inappropriate to move on the remaining aspects of the model. Until we are able to successfully answer these 2 beginning aspects of the model, it would be thoughtless to move forward with any major actions concerning the question items. Thank you.
Jenny Schottmiller?
It says 4 inches away on this thing here. I'm Jenny Schottmiller from Wrightstown. I just want to ask for a show of hands who's here to support Wrightstown Elementary School. Thank you. I wanted to say I heard a bunch of interesting things when I was at this meeting last week. The superintendent's recommendations, which I agreed with. I also agree with what the committee said about not doing nothing to save money. Obviously, we closed Richborough Middle School, we saved money, but I think we could do more. I listened to Mrs. Sexton say class size efficiency was a big concern, and I agree. And I listened to Mr. Grupp's idea to partner 2 smaller schools together, which I thought was very interesting. I heard from a committee member last week, but I reached out to some other people from the committees because I was curious to see had that idea been explored in depth, and it had not. And not for any other reason than it didn't appear to have on its face the benefits that generated anyone wanting to really delve into it deeply and explore it in depth. So over the last week, I've been doing that, and as I've done that, I've come up with the idea that Council Rock could form 5th and 6th grade centers. These would be centers, so the other elementary schools would be K to 4. Children would go to a 5 and 6 center and then on to the middle school with that same grouping of kids. Other similar sized districts already do this. You can save money, maybe sooner than what you would save by the recommendations, and in excess of what is in the current capital planning recommendations. You accomplish this by grouping more of the same age students at a smaller number of schools. So you have fewer kids. You don't have 10 kids. You don't have 4th grade at 10 schools. You don't have 6th grade at 10 schools. You have 6th grade at 2 or 3 schools. By doing this, your schools break less often. So you need fewer sections with the same number of children. Doesn't matter how many schools you have. It doesn't matter how large or small they are. If you were to consider this plan, you will save money. This creates an opportunity also to create programming around 5th and 6th graders who are ready to move on perhaps from some of the things that happen at primary school, but not ready yet for the middle school years. It's clear from looking at all this, though, that underlying it, you have to redistrict. I don't think there's any way around that. You have to balance who's going to the high schools. I'm going to talk more about this on Saturday. I hope to have a more specific plan to share with you. I've been talking to a lot of people, and I want to incorporate all the feedback that I've gotten before I share the details. I also will address things such as transportation and other issues that I've heard from people that I've already talked to. Thanks.
Amy McIntyre?
Good evening, Amy McIntyre from Newtown, here on behalf of Wrightstown Elementary. And I just want to share with you a few of my thoughts hearing all the conversation. And closing Wrightstown I think we all at this point know would be costly initially, at least $5 million to get an elementary school ready to receive our children. If we wanted to reuse Wrightstown Elementary School for another purpose, that's another expense. The savings, I don't know that any of those estimates are going to end up being on point. If any of them are, we're looking at maybe 10 years at the earliest that the savings would be recouped. So it can't be about the cost when we're talking about this, because it just isn't. When we're talking about enrollment and we look at our capacity, okay, our capacity in our elementary schools with no trailers is 5,900, roughly. Our current elementary school, and by the way, who wants to be at 100% capacity? You get a new kid, you're over 100% capacity. That's not good. So our current enrollment in the elementary schools is roughly 5,400. We're at 91% capacity when you spread it across our elementary schools, which is the sweet spot. It's where you want to be. It gives you a tiny bit of flexibility without being super inefficient. So it's not about the enrollment and the capacities and efficiencies there. So what I'm asking is, we want to know what this is really about, because we're hearing all these facts. It doesn't support a Wrightstown closure, yet from your comments, there's at least one or two of you who seem really set on closing Wrightstown. So I think our community wants to know, what is it about? It would really help us. And the projections, I would really like to echo what you said. And the projections for 2006 were off by 600 students for our district because they underestimated the effects of the economy in a downturn. And the same exact thing is happening now, except it's in the opposite direction. So we already have a history of being off with our projections. Why would we ever make decisions on these historically inaccurate projections when we're already seeing that the turnaround is happening in Wrightstown? 40% of the stabilization that has happened in the elementary schools happened at Wrightstown this September. 7 kids out of 17 district-wide. So I don't understand what it is about, because it's not about the numbers and the facts. So I want to know what it's about.
Tara Wiggington.
Good evening, Tara Wiggington of Ivyland. I'm here to voice again the opinion of the parents of the Achieve program currently located in the LSAC building. To remove the students and put them back in a school setting, whether it be elementary, middle, or high school setting, would have a detrimental effect on the students. Achieve is a transition program. They have transitioned out of high school to prepare in their own way for the real life. Moving them back into a school setting is like taking 10 steps backward. It would only result in regression. If the current location at LSAC cannot be maintained, the parents would like the board to take into consideration moving the Achieve program to the Twining Ford location as an alternative option. This proposal presents many advantages to our students. The only other community that has welcomed our students is the Richboro-Northampton community. There is a viable vision for this location. The Twining Ford location costs the district absolutely nothing other than general maintenance and upkeep, and compared to the rent, as well as the significant leasehold improvements that have been to the LSAC building, there is no comparison. According to the capital planning recommendations, currently at this location, the 3 buildings consist of the Aramark janitorial services, the maintenance, storage, repair building, and the administrative building housed in the largest building. Obviously, since Aramark is not part of Council Rock School District, they must be paying rent for that current location, and we, as the parents, would appreciate if the board could please inform us how much rent Council Rock is receiving from Aramark for that space, as this would be needed to be taken into the equation as a loss in revenue. Since the district's primary reason for relocating Achieve is to reduce or eliminate the exorbitant rent paid to LSAC, it appears economically feasible to move the program to the Twining Ford location. The maintenance department, since they handle the maintenance of the buildings throughout Council Rock, most likely is not even occupying that space all day, since they are out servicing the schools. It appears to be wasted space of a very viable building that could house the Achieve program. Due to the limited amount of time actually spent in the office, the maintenance department could be moved to the adjacent trailers, which are also owned outright by the district. Our students have visited the main building during several trips last year when they maintained the landscaping. From what I gather from my son, the building has several offices similar to what currently exists at the LSAT building, but what parents find most attractive about this location is the adjacent building currently occupied by Aramark. This building could help fulfill the vision of the Achieve program, specifically revamping the Aramark space as a community learning center for the students. Since the Achieve program was not included in the district's strategic plan, the district on paper does not have a vision for the program. However, the parents and students envision a program that not only prepares the students for viable employment in the community, but also integrates the students into the local community by developing projects that benefit the community, food drives, volunteering, local charities. That building could essentially become a learning center. The space could even be used as a workshop for the students to help maintain the facility as well as the upkeep of the location. At the back-to-school night, the staff was excited to tell us about how they were hoping to allocate 2 of the little offices at LSAC to replicate a functional living school. What's better than having a separate building to serve that purpose? Location would also cut down on transportation costs. It is within 4 miles of the industrial park in Ivyland, of which 3 businesses currently offer volunteer opportunities for our students. It has just been difficult for the staff to coordinate because of the distance to take advantage of these opportunities. That should not be one of the problems. There are also several businesses in the Richboro community that can be targeted. The Northampton Library, Shop and Bag, and now a new Walgreens, which also employs young special need adults. The choices could be endless. In addition to right next door, within walking distance, is the Richboro Retirement Village, another exciting volunteer opportunity. SEPTA is near the Jacksonville and Street Road location. Tyler State Park is within walking distance, creating horticultural opportunities for these young adults. If the committee plans were to reduce costs, then Twining Ford location appears to be nothing but a win-win situation. Our students deserve a home, not a corner in a current school. The parents respectfully request to the school board consider the option as part of the capital planning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Amy Fitzpatrick. Amy Fitzpatrick.
Hi, good evening. Amy Fitzpatrick from Ivyland. My first comment is sort of a side note. I consider myself fairly skilled at Google searches and have a professional background, although I currently stay at home. And for the life of me, I cannot find out who is my school board rep. I can't find it. I can't find it on your website. I can't find a school district map. I cannot find it. I have emailed a school board member, who I think is probably my school board member, to ask and haven't heard back. I'll let you know if it's him. There has to be a better way to reach your constituents, as my side note. I finally had a chance to watch last week's school board meeting yesterday on YouTube. I greatly appreciate the ability to do that. I wanted to say I appreciated Mr. Klein's recommendations, in particular in light of a stabilizing elementary school population that might be going up. We don't know. That's why I would like to advocate for a wait-and-see approach, in particular to closing elementary schools. I also greatly appreciate Mr. Klein's recommendation to not relocate our 26 little Ivyland elementary school students to modulars at Richboro Elementary School. As disheartening as it would be to have our elementary school closed, I can't tell you how infuriating it would be to put our kids then in a modular. If there is so much capacity that you need to close an elementary school, why isn't there room for our kids? That just doesn't make sense to me. Until there's room for our kids in other schools, be it from redistricting or the population declining at our schools to that point, you shouldn't be closing our schools. If we can't get rid of modulars yet, and we have a desire to right-size our schools, and it sounds like potentially move towards full-day kindergarten, I think there needs to be some of that flexibility. In particular, an earlier speaker used the word tolerance, which I think is a great word to use in this instance, that our elementary schools need to have a tolerance level. It sounds like it's presently 9% to account for in-migration, to account for upticks in the economy, and to potentially account for full-day kindergarten. The idea that we would not move towards full-day kindergarten simply because there are businesses who profit off of families who need their children to be watched for more hours a day is a shame. Finally, I wanted to echo the sentiment that I'm curious as to why there is not more time and consideration being put towards, I believe it was Mr. Grupp's proposal to buddy up schools or to partner schools so that we might have, say, an intermediary level. I think there are great efficiencies to be found both in reduction in teaching staff, in busing routes, and in helping right-size the schools so that there's the best population possible on each of our school campuses. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else like to speak? State your name and where you're from.
Nancy Carroll, Newtown Borough. There was so much missing or misleading information in the presentation given by the administration that 3 minutes is not enough time, but I'm going to try to do it in 3. Yes, the district took trailers offline while the enrollment was going down, but what wasn't said was the district, in the scope of over $60 million in renovations, built 25 additional classrooms, 6 at Holland, 7 at Churchville, 10 at Goodnow, and 2 at Salt Finestone since 2006. Saying there are a few classrooms at Newtown and Holland Elementary open when, as of June 2014, Newtown is down 188 students and Holland 2013 from their peaks is misleading. The statement, you could bring Goodnow close to 100% capacity, and I'll admit that, but we don't know what Goodnow looks like as we are just finishing the renovations, is simply not accurate. Because yes, we do know what Goodnow will look like when it's finished. And thanks to the Capital Planning Finance Committee, we also know what the cost per student is going to be. We know more than enough about Goodnow because there are reams of information, most of which is duplicated on the web, on what it will look like, from architect drawings to PlanCon documents to forms submitted to the state, from what's underground to what's behind the walls. We know the number and size of every one of its 49.5 classrooms and the educational function, whether it be music or 5th grade or special ed classrooms, for which the room was designed. We know that the 49.5 Goodnow classrooms are more than Richborough Middle or Holland Middle or Newtown Middle, and it's the 3rd largest in classrooms after the 2 high schools. We also know from the renovation how it is operating without 10 classrooms at a time during the renovations. We even know how the state and Schrader calculated 100% capacity. The state calculates 100 capacity by assigning 25 students to every room designated as a room for regular ed or special ed. And that calculation is done in a document called PlanCon. You can find Goodnow's on the web. The state calls that Goodnow's full-time equivalent FTE. Goodnow's FTE at 25 for 33 rooms designated as regular ed and 25 for students for 10 special ed is 1,075 students. The statement that disturbed me the most was the insertion of autistic support into Goodnow limited their capacity. First of all, Goodnow's peak capacity since 2002 was in 2010, and the autistic support was fully in place and has been there since the 90s. Back then, the politically correct designation was PDD, for pervasively developmentally delayed. And at the same time, we also had emotional support classes. Both subcommittees that I was a part of on capital planning paid extra special attention to special ed. We cared about them and their needs. We discussed at length the needs of the Achieve program and noted that Goodnow's population of autistic support will almost be cut in half at 49 students last year when the biggest class of 16 graduates this year. The next largest class is 9, and in kindergarten, there are 2 students, and they are assigned a full-size classroom at Goodnow. These 49 students were assigned 7 full-size classrooms. Lastly, the Schrader 90% numbers and how it's calculated. Although the state FTE is 1,075, is technically 100% of capacity. It is not realistic to get every section, especially in lower grades, where 25 is the CR guideline limit, to exactly 25. And Goodnow doesn't have enough special ed students to fill those 10 classrooms up to 25. So taking 10% off that number for 90% of a number would be a realistic capacity. But starting with the number of 940, which is 135 below the FTE, and then taking off another 10% for 94 more students, and setting as your goal for Goodnow 828 is, in my opinion, fiscally irresponsible. In the macro, it means 1,200 empty seats in Council Rock, and we know what that looks like. In Goodnow, it would mean, as Schrader calculates, by reducing both the number of regular ed classrooms from 33 in Plancon to 31, and the class size caps from 25 to 22.5, from 26 to 23.4, from 28 to 25.2, and 30 to 27, that if you go over any of those numbers, then you go over the 90%. And it shows at Goodnow that by doing this, you neither reduce the number of sections nor the number of teachers, and you will not save any money by going to 90%. Lastly, I didn't mean to do this. I hate to do this for the public because I know I make mistakes. But there was a thing handed out to everybody. I don't even know who handed it out because I came in late. The 9/8/14 enrollment is 2112, not 2440. That's on the sheet. So when you recalculate that, from peak enrollment, there's 391 available seats, existing 331, and 100% 359. And that doesn't count moving some students to Northampton.
Any other comments?
Good evening, John Mache, Wrightstown Township. Part of the issue that frustrates me in listening to the issues that are coming up, which are inspiring so much passion, and I commend the community for coming out, though, is that Council Rock School Board was given all sorts of information back in 2006 and 2007. And back then, it was clear that there was spare capacity in this district and that we did not need all the elementary schools. And yet the board at that time did not want to address the issue of redistricting because it would create uproar in the community. Well, at some point you have to do it, and it's now. Because to wait any longer, as was suggested by one of the speakers here, is a disservice to those of us who are trying to figure out how to pay our tax bills for what we're required to pay our tax bills for. We're required to pay our tax bills to provide an adequate education for our students, as mandated by the state. We are not required to provide buildings that make a community feel more together. We're not required to figure out ways to enhance morale. We're required to educate people. If parts of the community feel so strongly that closing a school will tear that community apart, then let those people stand up, figure out a way to fund a school on their own, and keep that community going. But to expect taxpayers to pay for more than is required by law is unfair to the taxpayers of this school district. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll have you do it at the end if you don't mind, because someone's up on their way to the mic.
Good evening. This thing's still running. Jim Tyrion, Wrightstown. So, Wrightstown Township pays taxes that I think supports not only our elementary school, but also other parts of Council Rock. I just wanted to make that statement. But it seems like we have potentially some data that might not be 100% accurate that was used in the 3 studies that were created over time. I think we have to consider that. I think we have key facts that have not been considered, as were pointed out by one of the economists that spoke today. We have a process and methodology that has not been applied, which was spoke by another person today when looking at quality and some of the things that very successful corporate companies use to be at the top. We should consider those in a 5-year plan. We have a senior finance director that reviewed proposals and concluded that school closures were not fiscally responsible at this time. We also have a superintendent that made some very good recommendations that seemed to be well thought out and based on facts last week, and I was impressed to hear that. And tonight, we heard that there could be another proposal that should be evaluated potentially before we do any school closures. I would just say that we have a lot to consider before we jump to school closures. Thanks for your time.
Sorry, I didn't know whether to wait till the end to do this, but Heather Oberhal, Wrightstown. I should have clarified, for the available capacity where it says available seats, the total seats are the numbers of Goodnoe, Newtown, and Salt Finestone. The 9-8 enrollment are the numbers of Goodnoe, Newtown, Salt Finestone, and Wrightstown, because those would be the number of kids fitting into those 3 schools. And unless I'm mistaken, and I may be, because I'm 40 with 3 kids, but I think that is. The 2440 is the enrollment number of the 4 schools, and the total seats is the enrollment number of all 3 schools that we would be moving into. Okay, thank you so much.
Anyone else?
I had a question in regards to the lady that just spoke.
Okay.
In regards to...
This is public comment for the board.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It was in regards to the pupil ratio. So I don't know if the board can answer that. From my understanding, the PA's code for special needs, she was saying 25 students in a classroom with the special needs with the teacher, and she'd allocate that for the class size, so we wouldn't need as many sizes because there would be more. But PA code for special needs doesn't allow you to have that many special needs in the classroom. So you can't count that being able to fit 25 students in that classroom, where depending on the functions, 15 with 1 teacher is the most.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jason Funk from Wrightstown. Just a quick comment. I think what I'd like to see, quite honestly, is that understanding the information we got from Mr. Klein at the previous meeting, the fact that enrollment in the elementary schools is indeed, at least has this year, increased, is that, again, while I appreciate what the volunteers did from the community to look into the issues, is that before the district goes and spends $5 million to readjust the schools and close a school, that instead of using volunteers from the community, that you hire a consultant, because quite frankly, that's a lot of money for the district to be spending simply from some volunteers from the community. So, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on to our agenda and our discussion items. So, I'm opening up the first discussion item, which is a discussion of capital planning for the board. I'd like to start off with, attached to the agenda is a question and answer. Is it posted to the web, Mr. Klein?
Not yet.
So it will be posted to the web. It looks very comprehensive to me. Looks good, but I don't know if anyone had any questions on the question and answer or wants to make any other comments around capital planning. Opening up discussion.
Mrs. Brooks had offered some suggestions, and I think I got almost all of them in there.
Is what's posted on here now
Yes.
edited? Oh, I have not reviewed that yet.
I've only glanced at it. I haven't seen all the edits, but
I'm sorry, just for my own
Go ahead,
knowledge.
Mrs. Brooks.
When is the intention to post that to the public?
Tomorrow, after we had a chance to look at it and comment today, I'll put it on the web tomorrow.
Could you do me one favor when we, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
can we let Mrs. Brooks finish? Did you have another comment?
Because I had sent some specific edits, so I would like to review this. I don't know what time we're going to get out of here tonight. I don't know that I'll be able to review it until the morning.
So we'll say noon. Does that give you enough time?
Is that, are you okay to wait?
I will tell you very clearly, the only thing I didn't change was your suggestion to move the enrollment numbers from June back to October. I kept the 614 enrollment in the chart. Every other suggestion you made, I made.
Can you add that column in?
Sure. I could put a parentheses that shows the October enrollment there too.
Just for the record, there's a question and answer document that's going to be posted on the web that Mr. Klein has shared with the board for feedback. One of the pieces of feedback that I gave was that the Pennsylvania Economy League numbers use October data. So when you're assessing what your opinion is about a current enrollment figure, it does not seem appropriate to me to use end of year numbers when the Pell report talks about October. So
the only counter I'd make to that is that the Pell report is a summative prediction from that point forward. They would take what I would expect to be the high number for any given year, not in October. I don't think they're predicting October enrollment. I think they're predicting what will be the summative enrollment for a year. But if the compromise is to put in October and then a June number for 13-14, just as a matter of clarification, I'm happy to do that.
I would do that because the numbers that they use in every one of their charts is October. So I'm not clear what the summative response is if they're talking about end of year or beginning of year, but when you're referencing a chart that only uses October, I think it's important to just have that piece of information.
If that's acceptable, I'll make that change.
Isn't October, the enrollment as of October, is it October 1st or the end of October?
October 1st.
That we report to the state, that we're refunded,
Yes.
based on, that's how we're paid by the state. So that number is the most consistent number to use year to year.
Correct.
Could you do me one favor, Mark, when you work with these documents? In the footer, can you start to introduce the reversion number and the date that it is updated? Because what will happen now is it's going to incorporate, you've now communicated to Denise that you're going to include all of her changes except for one. Well, now you'll include that too. Nobody else on the board knows what those changes are. So now, to find what those changes are, we have to reread the entire document to
They were
figure out
relatively minor.
if she puts up, I understand that, but it's thematically, this happens all the time, that we change something in a document and we don't know what version we're approving. So I'd like to have, as a standard, documents that go for the board have a version number and the release date, the date that they're changed on the bottom, so we know. Otherwise, where do I read in the document? I've asked you for track changes, but nobody else likes to receive track changes. But otherwise, I have to read the whole document every time to figure out what changed.
Yes? Okay. Other questions?
No,
Dr. Foster?
I had a request that feeds into the process as a whole.
Okay. Is there anything else on the questions and answers? Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Foster.
Yeah, so, and I'd mentioned this last time, so, you know, we're struggling with what is the capacity of our district. And for me, when I look at Soul Finestone, it's a school that the community is saying is currently pretty okay. No one's saying it's overcrowded. They're not saying it's empty. So it's comfortable. And then you look at a school like Newtown, it has the exact same enrollment as of last June within about 1%. But you look at the Schrader report, and there's diagrams of the schools, and you can count the rooms. And there's 7 more rooms at Newtown than at Soul Finestone. They have the same number of children. So, you know, that makes it sound like that school could hold more people, regardless of what it did in the past, just what we're doing now in the district with our current educational program. And then Goodnow has only 13% more children than Soul Finestone, but it has 17 more rooms. So that doesn't seem like Goodnow's at anywhere near a full capacity once it's done. And then if you go, it takes time, but if you go through the Schrader report and you count all the full-size rooms in all the elementary schools in the district, and you look at our enrollment, and you say, I'm just going to divide the enrollment by those rooms. How many children are going to be in those rooms? And I know that doesn't include special ed, but I haven't included the half-size room or the quarter-size room, and there's a lot of those in the district. Just, it's very simple math. You get 20 children per room. And so it seems like there may be space in the district, but we need to get it right. Everyone's right in the audience. We have to get it correct. You can't mess around with these numbers. So at the end of the day, to know, could you take a school away from the system, you have to get into things like decision insight and draw some boundaries, just as has been suggested, through the district, and pretend that you had closed a school, for instance. And I'm not saying we want to close Wrightstown, but if Wrightstown were not in the system, is there room to put them at Goodnow and Newtown Elementary and have the kind of program that's running at Soul Finestone apparently comfortably? So that's the request I have. I know it's a lot of work, but I can't make a decision without real numbers. I need district boundaries. I need to know what the district would look like. Whether we know all the kids' addresses, where they live, we know how many they are, we know what grade they're in. Let's just pretend that we redistricted today. What does it look like? Do they fit or they don't fit? That's the request. And I know it's easy to ask for.
And that's what I asked for last week.
Okay.
That
But it's
we
a big-
use the
yeah.
decision insight and that we try it. We just actually do the work of taking individual children from individual neighborhoods and redistricting as we did 12 years ago. 14 years ago. 14 years ago.
It doesn't mean we're going to do it,
But you have to see if it will work or not. And it has to be with reasonable assurance that the numbers that we're working with. I feel sorry for all of what's going on out there in the community in a lot of ways. We have all done that. A lot of us that are sitting here have already done that, have worked in the same way you are for a different cause. But it's so hard because I know that you feel so strongly and deeply and in good spirit for what you're trying to do. We owe it to ourselves to do it right. We owe it to ourselves to look at the position that Mr. Grupp talked about. I don't know how, I'm not good with taking kindergarten to second, third and fourth, fifth and sixth and breaking it that badly, but fifth and sixth, a fifth and sixth center, I'm not too terribly upset about that. There are ideas out there that we could find compromise on. But we have to try it. And I'm at a loss as to how a recommendation can be made by administration without showing us that first. Have you shown it to yourself?
I showed you what you asked me to show.
No,
We closed
have you
Wrightstown.
yourself taken decision insight and attempted to do that? And I don't see how otherwise you would know.
I showed you what it would look like to move the students from the 3 schools.
You showed us some sort of graph up there. I'm sorry. That certainly wouldn't have done it for me. And I don't think it did it for a lot of those folks either. They just liked the end conclusion.
Well, the purpose
So
was
I
not-
want to see how you got to that conclusion. I really want to see it in detail. And I think if it doesn't happen by your automatic doing, we're going to have to ask for motions of the board. We're going to have to ask motions that the administration be required to provide this to us. I'd rather that you were happy to do it on your own.
So I want to clarify, because in the week since the last meeting, you know, you see a lot of people and they ask you a lot of questions. And one of the things that's been said to me is, Denise, it looks like you want to close Wrightstown, and why don't you want to listen to the recommendation your superintendent made? So I just want to state that I am not 100% convinced that Wrightstown should close. I am also not 100% convinced that it should stay open. I am still assessing a lot of information. And I think what has to be underscored that in spite of the fact that there was a recommendation made last week, even Mr. Klein acknowledged there are no clear answers to these questions. Page 89 of the Schrader report indicates that there are different methodologies that you can use. Some members of the public have said the facts are clear, please make the right decision. And it's not clear. It's not a black and white thing. There's a lot of ways to interpret things. Professionally, I am a research director. I analyze data. I look at numbers all the time. I try to make sense of what they mean. And there's a lot of different ways to look at this. My clients at work pay me to look at them in every different way. And I am not approaching my role as a school director any differently. That being said, we have to stay focused on why are we going through this exercise at all? Our enrollment is declining, or our enrollment has declined. I don't know what the future holds. I will say that this year we are stable at the elementary level. We are declining as a district. In my job, if I were looking at these numbers, I would never say, based on this year's static view, next year you're going to have blank. I don't know what it is, but we have 1,400 less students now than we did in 2006. We have $130 million worth of identified needs in a capital plan. And let's not be fooled by that number. That's a huge number, but like, for example, the renovation costs for what are identified for Newtown Middle School is something around $30 million. But in our facilities meeting, a renovation of that building was quoted at $46 million, $48 million. So 130 is a conservative view of what those things would be individually, but if we were going to renovate buildings, we're talking about a lot more than $130 million. We have a pension crisis. We have new teacher contracts coming up. I don't want to like sensationalize this, but I do feel as a school board director that we are potentially on the verge of an economic crisis. We have a serious problem. So the last thing that I want to do is cut programs, if that can be avoided. And so I look at what was recommended, and I have a difficult time looking that the district's recommendation has us spending $100 million in the next 4 years, and we don't do anything that substantively saves money for 5 years. I don't see how the district's plan has recommended the kinds of efficiencies that we need. And there's only a discussion about taking off trailers as it relates to storage. It's not there's no specific plan of how the students come out. And I mean, I've said this before. For me, my priority is looking to save money before spending money, and I don't see a clear path to that. Now, the other piece of it for me is that I don't know that the Schrader numbers can be accepted as universally good. I have so many documents from 15 years of attending meetings prior to sitting on this board that conflict with those numbers. Now, I'm not saying the Schrader numbers are wrong, but it would be important for me to have answers to the questions about why inconsistencies exist before I can just accept it. But even if I do accept the Schrader numbers, I have a serious problem with 90%. 90%, I can't wrap my head around a financial crisis and 1,100 empty seats in the district. To me, that's an imbalance. But nonetheless, we have to, as a board, agree where that comes. But the answering of the inconsistencies. So just as a for instance, if I look in the northern sending area, Newtown, Goodnoe, and Saul-Finestone, those are great schools to use because in the peak, when those schools were at their peak, some of them had trailers, but today, none of those schools, none of those schools have trailers, and the number of classrooms that exist are actually greater than the number of classrooms that were available at the peak. So in At the peak, those 3 schools had 2,500 students, and today they are at 2,100 students. You have 400 less students in those buildings. But you can't necessarily look at the number of students because it's how they break and how many classrooms that uses. There are 19 available classrooms. There are 19 more classrooms available today than there were then. So it's hard for me to understand how we can't fill those spaces. The other thing is, a lot of things that we're talking about are predicated on existing class size guidelines. We haven't talked about that. Maybe we should. I don't have the current school year enrollment data to use it, but in looking at the 2013-14, if we had increased class sizes in grade 4 by just 1 student, which I don't believe compromises the educational program, we would have had 2 less sections. So that's 2 less teachers to pay and 2 more available classrooms for use. My concern overall is that in the long run, these schools that we are talking about closing are unsustainable. So when we talk about the human factors, we may dismiss this conversation today, but we're going to have to talk about it again next year probably, and the next year, and the next year. If it's somewhere in there, these schools don't come offline. Is that fair to the communities? We have to do our diligence to know if we know it's going to happen a year from now, maybe we should look at it and make sure it can't be done now so we don't prolong this agony for the schools. And again, I want to preface it, I'm not convinced it can happen, but we need to look at it. And these issues about, the conflicting numbers are troubling to me because I don't know what to believe. But I know that we once had a lot more space. So I absolutely would love to see the exercise that Patty and Bill have suggested, which is put this into Decision Insight and tell us what it looks like. Because that's the only way that I would be convinced that it couldn't be done.
Not tell, show.
Show, right. And even if it doesn't, I also agree that redistricting, that it's got to happen. It's just got to happen. And it's the thing is, but I also want to make sure that we understand some conversation has been said, like it should be, do it all at once, don't do it in piecemeal. And to some degree, I agree with that because I have a very strong sensitivity about redistricting any particular family more than once, not having a vision of what a redistricting now may look like later. So that's a particularly sensitive issue in Northampton, where if we ultimately want to send more students to North and Newtown Middle, the only place they can come from is Northampton. So I want to be really careful about Northampton redistricting that may make people think they're going to one high school only to let them think that they're, move it and go to another in a future decision. But in the northern sending area, that's actually a non-issue. I can dream of no circumstance where any student currently going to Newtown Middle School would not stay at Newtown Middle School regardless of what we do. And similarly, I can't think of any scenario where a student going to North wouldn't continue to go to North. So we can look at redistricting in not that I ever, it's a district as a whole, but really there's 2 distinct pieces that allow the view of redistricting to happen where they don't have to happen together. I'm monopolizing time. I rewatched the meeting. I went through things. I have many, many, many pages of notes of concern about what exists relative to the administration's recommendation, which I can continue talking about on Saturday, and because we have many more weeks, but I think I've hit on my highlights, so I apologize, and thank you for indulging me in my long speech.
Wendy, I think, last time, there was comments from board members who said, well, I'm disappointed in the administration's recommendation. I want to be very clear. We gave the administration the recommendations that came from the committee and said, give us your opinion on those. And that's what they did, and so that's what they structured. That they didn't include mine, the thing that I had proposed, It wasn't part of the recommendation, so true, it wasn't part of the mandate, part of the charter. What I think, though, was we as a board need to establish that the outcome of this thing that we're going to do, whatever it is, what does it achieve? And we need to mark and write those down concretely. And then the assessment of each of the individual components needs to be evaluated against each of those metrics and say, does it make it better or worse? Working here, not in any particular order, some of those things that I think when we look at each, you know, when there's something that says a closed Wrightstown, well, maybe there's 7 points, and each of those points is either marked as being neutral, positive, or negative on that item. So we can do it, because otherwise, if we can't agree on what those measures are, we're never going to agree on what we're doing, because we're all going to do it for reasons we don't understand and can't communicate to one another. Some of the points I think that globally we want to achieve, but everybody to a different measure. Every recommendation should be assessed as a straw man for what it means for expense or tax burden. What does it mean? What does it mean for academic achievement? Does it improve, neutral, -2? What's the safety component of it? Does it improve safety? Does it decrease safety? Class size optimization. Does it optimize the class sizes or not? Does it exacerbate what we have or does it not? This would be changes from status quo. This is not maintaining the status quo. What does it do? But what does it do? What do these changes make? There's some thought, because we've heard talk about, I don't think we've pushed it as an item as a board, but there's some talk, I wrote it down, neighborhood schools. Does it preserve some concept of neighborhoodness of schools? For me, an important aspect would be, does it preserve our nature of inclusion? Do we persist with special education and the inclusive nature of special education in this district? I wouldn't want to see that go away. Is it transportation optimized? Do each of these changes improve transportation, make it worse, or are they neutral? Are they building optimized? Does it improve the use of the building? Is it neutral or worse? Does it remove trailers? That's been some items that somebody, does it remove trailers that doesn't promote? You know, we were in a conversation in the last meeting where we talked about, you know, what would be the prospect for all-day kindergarten? Well, obviously, if you were looking at these metrics on that, one of those things is that would probably not allow you to get trailers off initially. Just by example, how you can measure these. It's got to be changed from status quo, but we have to agree, and maybe this is something we can do Saturday, which is let's establish what are the measures we're looking for so that when each item is assessed, we can determine what is it doing for us. Because right now, many of them, they're isolated. Every isolated idea, is it good, is it bad, is it better than the other? I don't know, because they're all in isolation. So for me, this would be important. The only other comment I wanted to make was for Amy, who spoke at the board, at the podium, about who's your board representative. I'll tell you this, I'm very pleased to tell you that if you were to write, in most cases, if you were to write to a board member, or 2 board members and say, this is my thought, you'll get an answer. If you throw it into the well and say, all board members, here's my thought, you often don't get an answer. And I've said this before, which is board members we don't communicate en masse among ourselves because of sunshine protections for the community. We don't communicate our thoughts or opinions outside of this venue to each other in a broadcast email. That's inappropriate. So this board proudly, I will tell you, it really doesn't matter who your representative is. It does when it votes. But other than that, you know, I've gotten requests from people in Wrightstown, and Denise has gotten requests from people in Newtown, and everybody's gotten somebody from somebody else write them, and they'll write back. All it takes is that you're respectful and that you give it reasonable thought, and you'll normally get a response. But if you target 1 or 2 board members to make the query up. So I'll respect that you don't know who it is. I'll say I'll tell you who it is later. I looked you up, and unless you moved, I know who it is. So I'll tell you who it is later. We'll see if you guessed right. But you can speak to any board member. Any board member will tell you, and there are people in the audience will tell you they're not in my district. They called me. We'll talk. It's the way it works. It happens really well.
So here's my view. First off, Jerry will speak to anybody. And I agree with some of the points you just made in terms of how we evaluate this, and I also agree with what Patty and Bill and Denise have said over there. For me, a lot of work has gone into this, not just the committees, but the public, and the public has raised some new information, which I think is good for us to consider. And again, the administration provided us with a view on commonalities, not a view on how they might do it from scratch. There's a ton of emotion that's involved in this, and honestly, it's, folks have talked about how tough it is to stand at the mic there. It's tough to sit back here and to listen to all of you because, only speaking for myself, I sympathize with everybody, as I know the entire board does here. We sympathize with each of the speakers, but the reality is that we've got to make decisions. As folks have said before, the status quo is not an option. For me, in order to be able to make decisions, I need a model. I need to see a plan. That includes actions, timelines, financial impact, academic impact. Some of the other things that Jerry referenced, I think, are good things for us to consider. And I think that lines up with best business practices, and there's lots of different models out there, similar to what the speaker mentioned. So for me, I believe that we need to provide the administration with specific direction to provide models and options. And I believe this is what I hear from some of my colleagues here, in terms of what, and this is for illustrative purposes only, to help me make decisions, but it might be in the context of, we'd like to see this particular plan modeled, again, to include the economic impact, the academic impact, the community impact, but perhaps here's several points that the administration could work on. And like I said, for illustrative purposes, to start a conversation, number one, consolidate/relocate Twining Ford and LSAC, possibly with each other, possibly using open space at North. How could we do it? And I want to be respectful of the new news, or the new information I've gotten around the Achieve program, and really understand what we're trying to achieve with that to make sure that we have the best choice. I think we have to look at consolidating the middle schools, renovating Holland, building Newtown new, and understand what that would look like to take Richboro offline. I agree that we've got to do a complete redistricting to address our capacity. I believe there's capacity out there. It's going to be like pulling a Band-Aid off, but I believe once we do it, it's the right thing to do, and it's not only going to serve our students and our teachers, but it's going to serve our taxpayers. I think we have to respect class size while we're doing that. I think we need to include the elementary schools, the middle schools, and the high schools, accounting for the changes that we're potentially suggesting within the middle school, and if we decide to use North for any non-9 to 12 activity. I think we have to remove and redistrict to compensate for removing all the trailers, with the exception of Wrightstown and Rolling Hills, which I don't think we could do without saying we were going to close a school, and based on current enrollment, I'm not prepared to make that decision. Now, that being said, I'd like to see the administration prepare a plan consistent with that redistricting and potential capital improvements to our elementary schools to consolidate at least one elementary school, possibly as soon as 2016. At this point, I don't think it makes sense to do it in 2015. If I were shown data that it would make sense, that would be one thing, but I just don't think it's enough time for the community to go through. But I want to see what that looks like given the capacity, and a lot of that's going to come down to the drawing of the maps with the decision insights to show that it's possible. And as far as House Track, we haven't talked much about it. I think it's an asset that we have. We own it. We're not pressed for time to do anything. And it's something that we can keep in our back pocket. So, again, that's a starting place. I would love to see the administration take that or various versions of that other people might feel passionately about and show us specifically how you would do that over 5 years and what, again, the financial impacts are relative to revenue and appropriations, required taxes, and, hey, if we're allowed, or if we're able to find enough efficiencies, when we can get to no taxes or possibly returns. And again, maintaining safety, education, class sizes, all that. So I think that's the direction that this board's got to get to over the next few weeks, is to give this administration something specific or a few options to model so we can get to a decision.
So my question for you is, why would you not include Wrightstown and Rolling Hills in a redistricting?
No, I absolutely would. No, I was just talking about the removal of the
trailers. Why Why would you not remove them from everywhere? Because having children out in trailers, we have locks on the doors. That's like Fort Knox getting in and out of the buildings. All right? But you have some kids in little tiny classrooms outside. Why would you not redistrict, get rid of those trailers everywhere, and bring those children through redistricting back into safer buildings?
No, my understanding is we would have to close both those schools if we took those trailers off, or they
Why
would be
would
so,
we have to
they
close
would be
the
so
schools?
small, they would be inefficient, and maybe that's the answer. But the point for me is to see the redistricting
So
proposal.
I mean, I would want to see the model totally, as well as the other way, if you want to see it that way.
And that's-
But I don't see why two communities would be protected from redistricting, and the whole rest of the district goes through it.
No, I'm not protecting them from redistricting at all. But Patty, my point is to be able to provide the administration with a plan they could model for us. So, you know, we could look at both, we could look at yours. I think we have to take a look at everything.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's what I would like to see what a redistricting plan would look like if we closed Wrightstown, what a redistricting plan would look like if we took every trailer off and kept and shut no buildings.
That would even be a move forward.
Because
no trailers
That's exactly the kind of
everywhere.
discussion I want to
So
see.
Because if we're not ready to close a building yet, it is silly to wait to fill significant numbers of empty spaces that exist in certain buildings. I mean, we can't touch obviously we can't touch the middle school. There's lots of empty space at Holland Middle, there's lots of empty space at North, but because it's a whole domino effect, that takes more planning. But we can make immediate decisions to get greater efficiencies and get the trailers offline, which is, I think, probably the only thing this board universally agrees to.
The idea of actually having full-day classrooms outside, I don't believe we still do it. I mean, I know we still do it. I don't mean that. I just
more like you can't believe.
I can't believe we still do it.
But that,
Given the levels of security that we put in all of the schools and in all the schools you visit, they all have the kids indoors now, primarily. So I would think, as a parent, you wouldn't want your kid outside.
well, that's by example. That's the proposal which, you know, the thought piece I worked on and the Jenny Schott worked on was based on that same concept, which was optimized within the framework of what we have now. And that's where my proposal initially said 13 fewer sections. Hers is coming out around 10 and a half fewer sections. All the buildings need to be used, but by grouping them, you're optimizing
the
your
other
space.
piece of it is, though, one little thing that echoes for me is the capital needs of the buildings. So let's just say, you know, Wrightstown needs $10 million worth of work, but in the end, without trailers, or even if we built an addition, at best it's going to have 2 sections per grade. In terms of efficiency, I'd rather put that $10 million maybe into an addition on another building that would create greater efficiencies. I don't know, but the point is that we have to be so cognizant of these capital needs and the assessed numbers of 7, 6, whatever. What if they become 8s? What if they become 9s? And then we're forced to make decisions on buildings. Like, this is...
That is a consideration moving forward. I don't think, as you mentioned, that the capital improvement is going to look the same next year because buildings are turning more than 25 years old. And so
that's the concern.
Yeah, and that was the whole, you know, part of the impetus for going to plan was Doug's binder. And to be able to take into account Doug's binder when we're challenging the administration to redistrict, consolidate schools, renovate different buildings, you know, should take a lot of that into account and help us understand that.
So my question is, how would anybody see? I mean, if we've all talked about here, or everybody has in some level, between data confusion, decision insight, redistricting, class size philosophy, trailers, do we want to take those in pieces on Saturday? Like, how do we structure Saturday? Do we want to take 3 of those and everything gets an hour? Or I don't know that we're using our time efficiently.
Well, if you're, I don't want to interrupt you.
I'm asking
but,
anybody.
So I'll make my comments I was going to make. It doesn't exactly, I'm not answering your question, I'm just giving my thoughts. I think looking at those pieces are valuable. I think there are some immediate things that this board could vote on in the near future, November, that we may not all agree on, but that we would have enough information to vote on, and that we should talk about. There was some discussion about whether middle school should be 6 to 8 or just 7 and 8. There's building a new school or renovating Newtown, and there's renovating Holland. And while a full redistricting could impact that, the general idea of, do we want to move forward with some of those things? And for me, I pulled everything out, starting with Doug's binder, the Schrader report, all 3 proposals that we had people do, notes that I had, the information I could understand that's been handed out at the community. Some of it I could understand, some I could. Tried to put it together. There is a lot of confusion on that, but for me, at the end of looking all that, where I was, is there's a lot of conversation and investigation that needs to be done. We need to look at redistricting, take trailers off, or redistricting parts of the community. There's still outstanding questions. I need more information before I can vote on it. I'm not decided, much like some other people have said. My instincts are it's going to take longer than into next year before we can close an elementary school, but I'm not set on that. It's just a leaning. But what hit me, and it wasn't addressed by the committee who spent a year investigating, I mean, it was addressed, but not immediately, is the building we have with the most obvious space that I've never heard any disagreement on is North. And we spend $460,000 at LSAT. And I'm not talking, the more than the Achieve program is there. Why can't we start to get rid of that space we're paying lease for and move it into space at North now? I mean, they don't even, I think my understanding is the building would like to have some of the space back, try to say it nicely. But, you know, any of that we could move. If we could move, sorry, Matt, we could move the IT people there, whatever we can move. And again, I understand there are other considerations around the Achieve, and Twining I thought was an interesting suggestion. Some of that could be looked at. But today, I don't understand why we couldn't do that. And that saves us money today. And so for me, I'm like, oh, I have all these questions about elementary school, and can people fit, and can't they fit, and are we gonna do it this year? And 2 years from now, when it's a different board and enrollment goes crazy, are they gonna open up back a building, which is a fear I have. I do not think that that would be wise. So if I make this move, I want to be 10,000% convinced that it's going to be for a good 5 years. I can't predict beyond that. But I think that there's money sitting on the table that this board could maybe agree on in November, and we could start to move. I think there's probably renovation that needs to be done, and Matt can tell me all the reasons why it might not move so quickly, as in my mind it just goes zoop, okay, saved money. But I want to not spend so much time on things that we have a lot of questions on and things we need to dive deeper in, that we maybe miss an opportunity to do something quicker that we could maybe get agreement on. And so for me, as far as when we're talking about what do we do Saturday, I'd like to talk about some things that we think we could do quickly, as well as maybe these are some things we need more presentations on, or we need, you know, the administration to do decision insight and redistrict the whole district without trailers and some of those things. But I definitely agree that there's some financial issues and some things to be looked at. But there are still a lot of questions on this board. I like Mr. Grupp's idea of a scorecard, but by the same token, we just have so much information that somewhat conflicts with each other. It's really, really, really hard to understand what's right, particularly at the elementary school. And the last thing I'm going to say is there was some talk about redistricting the whole district, and one of the proposals, I believe it was the first one, said something about moving an elementary school to North because there is space at North, and I don't know if anybody on the board, how they feel about that. I think the volume or the number of students at South functions pretty well right now. It's mostly full. It's good. I'd rather not have 2 schools, whatever the percentage would be, full with a little bit of extra space. I'd rather say, okay, South has a good amount of kids, let's take that space we have at North, let's regroup that space and use it for a different purpose, then shift, I feel like if we put them all in one bucket and reshift them at the high school level, then we'll just have these little bits of spaces that we won't be able to really do a lot with. So I don't know if that's right. The administration and the people who run the schools can maybe tell me better, but my thinking was, as opposed to shifting the sending areas at the high school level, it feels to me like there should be enough space to carve out some space and use it for another purpose.
It's interesting, when you speak about North, one of there were two original purposes for the LSAC building. The first purpose was a network operating center.
Yeah.
Because originally the network operating center was going to be in the basement of this building, which at the time we looked at it and thought, not a good plan to stick a lot of expensive computers in the basement of a building, because it could potentially flood. It doesn't, hasn't while we've been here, but it could potentially. The second thing was the alternative education, the alternative school.
Yeah.
And let me just give you the short history on the alternative school. Was initially, when I got on the board, it was over at a garage at Chandler Hall, where they needed the space to build. It moved from there to behind, I may have missed one, but behind the Church of God's Love in Newtown, until they lost students in their preschool program and threw them out. And it moved from there to what we now call the Sale House, and it existed quite well there until we realized we had the LSAC, and it was a more school-appropriate building because of the number of students. Throughout all, and I missed one, which was I left Welch out. Because when Welch first opened, it moved into the rooms where Northampton used those as day offices.
Community,
What you notice in the commonality in all these, and which is an essential theme, at least it was, and if we change where it goes, it'll change the nature, it was to allow these students not to be in the high school experience, because that, for some of these students, exacerbated their issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I continue with that. You have to think about it. The notion of separating a part of a high school to be used as an elementary school is kind of a fascinating notion, which then makes for a place you could use. So, but
I'm not suggesting the Sloan School, because I fully respect it, and I've had the tour, and I completely agree but we need to say there's space in a big building, and there seems to be, I've heard zero arguments against this. Everyone agrees there's space there. Well, we need to figure out how we find that space and use that space, and we need to meet the needs of the students. I mean, I think you've heard me talk about that.
And that was my comment last week when I heard.
That's doable today.
When I heard the Achieve discussion from last week from the speaker, one of my thoughts was, there are administrators in this building who work, the tax office should be in this building, because I don't need, but there are administrators, because they see the public, but there are administrators in this building who don't see the public, they just don't walk in.
Yeah, I agree.
That those people could be at North with not issue for me. Many of Matt's team could be at North, accepting the wiring, with not an issue, which makes this building, I say it again, a perfect location, in my mind, for a program like
I would be happiest to say to the administration, we all agree there's space there, tell us what you would do with it, and the goal is to stop paying rent. But my thing is, I think we might be able to agree on that. I don't think there's a lot of argument.
When we talk about places where there's lots of space, North obviously is the obvious one.
Right.
Holland Middle, Newtown Elementary, and Holland Elementary are all things that come up that we all agree have space. For me, I think it's great to look at relocating things into North, because first of all, that's the biggest space.
That's
not going to be corrected anytime soon.
Agreed.
But I want to make sure, for me, I would not consider anything repurposed into an elementary school where there's empty space when we are dealing with so many elementary school issues. The other thing is, I'm really intrigued by the idea of relocating Achieve into Twining Ford, and
I am too.
add to the list of things that we go on the road tour of the school board. I personally have not been to the Twining Ford facilities in a while, and I'd like to see that to get an understanding of what usability, what's the potential there.
I'm just saying maybe that there's some things that we could talk about that we not have a bunch of other questions that maybe we could agree on sooner than later, because I think it's everybody's goal. I mean, I've taken a fair amount of public comment about either you're waiting too long, you're never going to make a decision, or you're not moving fast enough. And honestly, I'm somewhat sensitive to that. So I'm trying to say, okay, I need more information. I have lots of questions. There's more discussion around these things. Are there some things that maybe we can start on and we can move in that direction? Because no school board gets together, commissions a community group for a year who doesn't want to do things. I don't think there's any lack of desire. We don't take a beating at public comment for fun. You know, we have an honest desire to do the best we can to educate these kids most efficiently. But so all my purpose on Saturday, that's where this all started, was we are having a meeting on Saturday in this building at 9 o'clock. It's starting. I would like the board's agreement to end by noon because I think 3 hours is enough. If we end sooner than that, great, but I don't know. But I've been asked what's the maximum time. And talk about some of the things. I would like to talk about some things that maybe we have we feel we have enough information to maybe say, I'd like to put this out there as a motion. I think we could vote on it in November. I don't know without seeing these redistricting things if we'll be ready.
But what I'm looking for is what Andy suggested, which is, can we request specific models that we want?
Yeah, we can request anything we want.
And I mean, I like what Jerry said about having criteria.
I do too.
But you know, when it comes to something like, and I'm just saying it, closing Wrightstown. First of all, if it can't be done, then we don't need to talk about it. But I don't know that it can't be done unless I have the model done.
Well, we've asked for 2 models.
Right,
I don't know, and I will consult with Mr. Klein unless you want to answer now. I don't know if it's reasonable to have those models done by Saturday.
Oh, I don't think it would be, but
Okay.
we could agree.
I just want to be clear.
But,
You're not running a school district with 11,000 kids in it too, are you? Okay, so we can. Yeah, I think we can make I would hope we'd make a list of things we'd like to see. We can talk about these topics. We can frame out a scorecard of sorts that we feel comfortable that we want to rate things on. I'm happy to talk about that. I'm just putting out there, would you be happy to talk about some things that maybe we could vote on sooner rather than later? That's my 2
I
cents.
would be happy, some of the items that you brought up for that kind of a discussion, I'm good to go with. But you have to remember, as we talked about, I actually went and sat with the Sloan kids last year.
Yeah, I know.
For a while.
Yeah.
And
I've been there several times. I do
so
completely
this is
understand
not-
that that's
this is-
not
this
what I'm
is not,
suggesting.
oh, we'll just pick that group and send them.
No.
Sometimes I have the urge to take everything and move it like chess pieces and just be done with it.
Right.
But those children, and I agree to look at a space that the community around Achieve is satisfied and happy with, because
Can I ask a
that's
question
our
about LSAC?
responsibility.
At LSAC, police, are we committed to paying what we're paying, regardless, like if we moved parts of that out, does the fee come down? So we can save money by moving even one little piece out or 2 pieces?
After our lease is done.
No.
At the
Before
end.
the lease
Next
is
year.
done?
It was
Yep.
one of the
At
recommendations.
the year
that I made
end,
last
Patty.
week.
At the year.
All right, and that's what I thought I heard, and I just wanted that confirmed. So even if we can't, with any speed,
That's where I'm going.
relocate everything that's there, we can relocate portions of it that
Anything.
fill empty spaces, save us money.
Yep. And I don't think it's a hard, I mean, maybe, I'm not wrong. We need to make that decision sooner because then we need to say to the administration, you got to find what to move and you got to figure out how it fits.
We don't mind moving those IT guys. They're flexible. So they're not, they go anywhere.
They want to go to the cloud.
They come out of the
They'll go to the
basement.
cloud.
I think they want to go to like a beach.
So does it make
Their
sense?
mothers won't come and yell at us. So this is, their mothers will probably
You never know. You never know.
Does it make sense, and I don't know if we can do this, but given we want to keep to a 3-hour agenda Saturday, and I'm sure we'll have public comment for a piece of that, do we want to try and consolidate people's thoughts in a centralized place prior so we can come in similar to what we did as we built board objectives and say, here's where I have a bias of action, here's my question, and then we can consolidate it and feed it in?
How about if each of you email me items for the agenda, so to speak? I'm not going to get an agenda publicly posted before Saturday morning at 9.
Already posted, but it's a very
It just, yeah,
No,
it's
but I would say
capital planning.
specific to that, just to get to your point around where can we move, where are the items where you already have a bias for action?
I will try
What
to.
questions do you have?
Yes, good idea.
That you still need answered in order to form an opinion. So if you can get those kind of 2 sets of things in, that we could probably consolidate.
And I'll
Say,
organize
here's what
that
we all want to
and-
talk about now, here's what we can do a little bit more work before we can.
Is that acceptable? Does anybody have any issues with that? Mr. Biley? No? Okay. So I'll try to put that together. That's my 2 cents, at least for tonight. Did Mr. Biley and Mr. Armstrong, you haven't had a chance to speak. I don't know if you would like to say anything, either one of you. Mr. Biley, you look ready?
I can go. First, I want to apologize for being late. I just drove up from Virginia, and it took a little longer than I thought it was going to be. I did hear the first part of public comment before I left the house, and I wanted to reach out to Miss Fitzpatrick, I think her name was. I have been away all week, so if you send me an email this week, I'll remove the shroud of secrecy. I am
Oh, Mr. Biley.
And Jerry tried to cover that, but I do agree that I think everyone on the board probably feels the same way I do, that we represent the entire district, and as Jerry said, we can be asking questions as we are from throughout the district. So I will get back to you as soon as I can. Okay? And Denise had mentioned that some people had come up to her and said, "It sounds like you want to see or close Wrightstown." And I had a similar situation over the weekend where I overheard a person say, well, there's clearly 2 board members who want to close Wrightstown, and one of them was Mark Bialik, and I was standing next to the person. And I listened for a couple more minutes. I said, I don't think Mark Bialik wants to close Wrightstown.
No, you don't know. You don't know him as well as I do.
Oh, yes, he does. But I want to say I don't have a want in this, and I, for one, would really like to kind of see the process pulled back a little bit. I feel like every time we sit down and we hear from the public, I get great information, I get great insight from my fellow board members, and I feel, certainly with Newtown Middle, that the process is very rushed, and I'd like to see it pulled back a bit. Understand that we have to get things done. I really would like to feel some common goals. We go through this information, and we're talking about process, and I'm not really sure what we're trying to get out of this whole thing. So Saturday, I'd like to talk about goals.
Okay.
And really if we just identified our 3 wants in this, that would be fantastic. And I do have a concern when we're talking about the process. Next year, we potentially have, next year election for 5 new board members.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we're talking about closing elementary schools or possibly closing elementary schools or middle schools, I would really want a 5-year process at least, so these new board members could potentially be part of it. That's my thoughts. I'm not going to be,
You kicking us off, Mr. Biley? No,
What's
I'm
that?
just kidding.
I'm working on it. I'm just kidding. I'm completely kidding.
Mr. Emerson, would you like to comment?
Yeah, over the last few days at least, we're concerned about if we're properly and adequately considering the pension crisis with regard to the plan.
Okay.
Okay. I'm wondering if the board has adequately considered the pension prices with regard to the plan or plans that we'll be discussing. Mr. Reinhardt has showed us how we can weather the storm with regard to both renovations and new construction and the pension contributions. And they use the word storm as an understatement. I think in today's paper they used the word Armageddon. So that's one of my concerns. Another one of my concerns, Denise, I appreciate everything that you said, but I don't want class size to be sacrificed in order to make the economic decisions that will drive us in voting one way or another on the plan. I'm committed to what our class sizes are. I understand what you said if we have
I
one
just suggested that we need to look at it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I know it would make a difference, but of course, there's going to be a line, and with regard to class size, I don't want to cross that line. With regard to these models, yes, the administration can conceivably give us every practical option there is, every model there is, but I think us as a board, we should try to limit that down. Maybe that's what we should do on Saturday. Come up with practical, conceivable options and then give it to the administration and say, okay, this is what we agree on. Give us models with regard to these factors, rather than just placing everything under the sun on the administration and say, give us all these models. So that's my suggestion.
Anyone else? Okay, so on Saturday, we will start at 9 o'clock. I just want to review a couple dates for for everyone as far as discussions on this topic. We currently have Saturday beginning at 9 a.m. It will be a public meeting, much like this. And then our next scheduled meeting for discussion is October 2nd. We had at one point talked about adding in next Tuesday. I don't know if the board at this point feels the need to do that, but if not, because we barely have enough time to advertise it, I personally won't be in town. I'm away on business. Mrs. Sexton, did you want to say something about that? Tuesday? Is it yes or no? Okay, so.
I think we can always have the option, I mean, the last week of October, we have nothing planned. I mean, we have options to add things in at a later time.
We do have a Facilities and Finance Committee meeting that week.
Oh, right. I forgot, we're only off from capital planning that week, we're not actually off.
I think
But my point is, I mean, there are other Tuesdays. I think it's premature to plan for Tuesday now. I want to try to process, as it was, just, normally we have 2 weeks between
Right.
meetings. Just having from last week to this week.
It's a lot.
It's been very overwhelming to try to process everything, and the combination of this and Saturday, I'd rather just.
I think it's a better idea to wait. We need some time to digest things, and even to Mr. Valley's point about not rushing things. We need to make sure we fully understand and digest. And there may be work that needs to be done in between, and we need to allow some time for some of that work to happen. So then the next meeting we will have discussion at is October 2nd. We are currently scheduled for a public meeting on October 9th.
That's South.
At South, that is correct. And that was particularly around public comment and going out into the community for these ideas or things that we may be moving towards. So it is possible that we could have board discussion and board time and not just do public comment. And so I think on the 2nd, we will have to decide the nature and the agenda for the meeting on the 9th so that people know what to expect, et cetera. I think originally we conceptually anyway might have thought it would be like, oh, these are some of the motions and do we have public comment on them? It may be more of a discussion at that point. But they're still scheduled and I think we should still have them if everybody's in agreement. We're going to publish them out. We did then, of course, have a board meeting on the 16th, and then we have a board meeting at Newtown Middle School on October 23rd to once again discuss with the public, listen to the public, what's happening. And right now, anyway, furthering any change, we have the idea that we would have some motions or some degree of planning for November 6th. That was a target date we had put out there to at least do some movement. So with the board's permission, we had talked about a communications to the community. I'd like to take this chart, which is actually in the questions and answers, but put it out to the public saying that the board is considering a number of items in regards to facilities and school buildings, including possible redistricting and closing of potential schools. Please. And I'm not going to mention any school names. I'm just going to say it's out there for everybody because and here are the dates, and please come and attend. And here is the link if you'd like to see it. And it will be from the school board, and Mr. Klein would put it out on listserv. And is that what we want to do? We had talked about the way to communicate this. I can get that done tomorrow, assuming it can go out in listserv tomorrow. Is that acceptable? Okay. All right, so that's the last thing I have around capital planning. We can move on to policy 218.3. Mr. Klein. Policy 218.
In July, the board asked the administration to come back with some thoughts and ideas on some suggestions that were made on policy 218.3, which is the policy on drugs and controlled substances. I circulated to the board a memo that addresses those issues. Just as a matter of history, there was some conversation, and it culminated in our meeting on July 31st to talk about the sanctions that are part of policy 218.3. The first offense for a drug or controlled substance violation in Council Rock is a 45-day school expulsion. It requires, although requires is the wrong word, it offers as one way of working with the student the insertion in our Twilight program, which is also, by the way, run out of the LSAC program, so something also to keep an eye on. It's important that we take a look at this on a regular basis, and the board has reviewed this policy on a fairly regular basis to ensure that it still aligns with what we're hoping to do. When the administrative team came in on the 31st, you heard from myself and our school principals, as well as the members of our central office team, that the policy as it's written is still something that we would endorse. It acts as a deterrent in a number of different ways, particularly to the fact that we have no second offenses to this recorded in at least the last 5 to 8 years. So the board in the conversation talked about some other opportunities to actually take the policy and reframe it, or at least look at some of the things that we were doing with it. Most of them had to do with the Twilight School experience for students, because when a student is excluded from school for a violation of this or any other exclusions that are required by board policy, we do offer our Twilight program. It's a program that we believe has been effective. It's not perfect, it's not meant to be perfect, but it offers two things. It offers a component of academic tutoring offered by not only the person who is the main lead in Twilight, but also teachers that come from the high school to help. And it offers a counseling component. And to Mr. Abramson's issue, which I thought was a good question when we talked on the 31st, the preamble of our policy talks about prevention. It talks about an opportunity to make sure that this policy somehow syncs with the many different procedures that we have with respect to prevention of drug and alcohol abuse. So rather than go into detail on this, the bottom line for us is that we did have a couple suggestions for the board if you wanted to pursue them. One of them would be somehow the insertion of an in-school suspension program that allowed for us to take a student who was out for 45 days and transition them back a little bit early into the high school, not necessarily back into classes, but into an in-school suspension program. The opportunity to move the Twilight program to a 9 to 12 program was problematic, most specifically because we wouldn't get our academic tutoring done at that point in time, and that's one of the real values of having it after school. We'd also lose our counseling component because we cobble our schedule with the Sloan counselor with the person that we use at Twilight, and there would be an overlap then for the Sloan issue. So you've had a chance to look at this. I'm sure you've had a chance to read through it. If there are any questions, I'm happy to address it, unless you tell me differently. The policy itself, the sanctions itself in 218.3 will stay as written. If you tell me that you want to revisit that policy as a whole, I'm happy to bring it back to you. That was the purpose of the 31st meeting, and I don't think we got a mandate from that to do anything other than start to look at some of these alternatives.
Mr. Ballard?
The only point that I would like to make is that it reads the first offense will result in a recommendation by the administrator for expulsion for 45 calendar days. As someone who sat on a few of those panels, I would, you have varying levels of guilt, for lack of a better term. I would like some latitude to maybe give them a 15-day suspension or a 20-day suspension, or some kind of latitude. I'm sorry. Whatever the term is, Rick, I'm sorry. But I felt like it was either we had to give them 45 days or nothing, so I was a little uncomfortable with that. That would be my only point with this policy, is give us some latitude. You're asking for us to rule on this, whether it's a guilty or not guilty, or founded or unfounded, whatever the term is, but give us a little bit of a slide there.
The dilemma with it, and I understand you absolutely, is our administrative team would say strongly there should not be latitude in this. There can be at some point in time, and there's language within the policy that we can mitigate some of this in extraordinary circumstances. But the dilemma is, how is the discretion applied? And right now, the board has not seen very many of these expulsion hearings. Most of the time, it's fairly clear that, in fact, both of our administrators said to you that in almost every situation, the student admits to the offense. It's very difficult to apply by saying, well, that's a good kid, or that's not a good kid, he needs more of a time, or that was a de minimis infraction, or they drank at an after-school event. All of those things are things that our administrative team says. It's easier is the wrong word. It's fairer to say, if there's a violation of the policy, it's a 45-day expulsion. There's no latitude in there except for extraordinary cases that I can bring to the board and plead for that. But it's very difficult in this situation to enforce a discretionary piece in here. You've either violated the policy by having a controlled substance or be under the influence, or you haven't.
But to Mark's point, there's a difference between the recommendation of the administration and what the board can vote on at an expulsion hearing. So if the board at an expulsion hearing says it wants to go against the administration, which may not be the wisest thing to do, but if the board can.
Sure. The board always has that discretion. It's in the discretion. It's in the discretion of the administrators to be in with. I would not change the policy to say it's a sliding scale between 15 or 45, because those are the issues that come before our administrators. If the board wants to mitigate that, they always have the opportunity to change their policy.
No, my point is that you could simply make it up to 45 calendar days. Because, not to get into the details of the situation, but you had some students who we felt were being untruthful and some students who came up and said, yes, I did this. And there should be some level of difference between those two cases, because it only leaves us with a not guilty or a guilty in that case, or whatever the term is, I'm sorry, founded or unfounded, whatever we're using in that case. Because it just gives us zero latitude. It feels like a mandatory minimum kind of situation.
And I can't remember, I said on some of them, and I actually wanted to have a lesser sentence to Mr. Abramson's point, but I was outvoted. And, I was outvoted. I mean, that's the will of the board, and that's fine. I mean, it was a deliberation among a jury, and,
This is
If
the
the board members present wanted to reduce that,
This is the board policy.
and it was a majority,
And
they
so
could
what
have.
happens is, in my opinion, it imposes on the administration this 0 to 45, absolute, kind of discrete numbers, 0 or 45. Either they didn't do it or they did it and they get 45, because otherwise you put the administration in a spot where they're bargaining, and I don't know that I want to have them in that spot. As for board policy, it's still within the discretion of the board. The board could actually go into one of these truthfully and find it so egregious that although the committee, the administration suggested 45, if the child is 17 years or older, we can ban them, we can expel them permanently and have no responsibility for educating them at all. It's within the discretion of the board. It would be a little distasteful, but it could be something incredibly distasteful or egregious that the board would make that jump to. So I'm okay with it taking it out of their hands and saying it's either guilty or not guilty, because the other part is that so many of these are handled by waiver that then you start to get into plea bargaining. And when they start doing plea bargaining, now I'm concerned that this board, either as it's established now or the 5 new members you spoke of earlier, that they'll come in and they'll say, well, we don't like that you chose 30, we want to do 35, and then we get into that we disavow the waiver that they've already negotiated. So for me, that's okay. On the topic, though, Mark, I have a question on the, Mark Klein, on the topic of number 1, the tutoring that occurs in areas like math and science. That is done by the subject teachers at the high schools now. They do that gratis? Do they do that on release time? How is that funded?
It varies. In some cases, we pay an ERPP for a person to come over if we really know that there's a course sequence that has to happen, and sometimes we have teachers come over and just help. We've mandated in the past our student teachers to go over and just serve some time there and to help. So it varies.
Well, so it's kind of interesting to me when you say that, because one of the things that we spoke about last time we met, we got into a great discussion, we've had it many times, about adapting teachers who was only a 0.8 or a 0.4 or a 0.6, that we use teachers. Teachers are not fully employed necessarily as full FTEs. They're oftentimes, as per need, we define what we need and we hire the teacher that way. So I guess my question, one of the underlying concepts about the possible move of a twilight school to a more daytime environment was the acknowledgement that these are students who've already somehow made a bad decision and that we're working to correct that. And the notion that the time from 7 in the morning, when they would have otherwise gone to school, and 2 in the afternoon, when they would go to the twilight, is 7 hours where we are oftentimes looking at students who've already made bad decisions now without supervision. And that was the rationale. So I don't disagree with your maintaining the program, the policy as it is. I agree with that. I think that we need to be a little more open to the idea of modifying the hours, because while we talk about, well, we reuse this teacher, we need to buy, we need to hire someone to do that. Well, you know what? We hire 0.2 teachers now, and we hire 0.4 teachers now. We need to hire teachers when we need them, not take the teachers when they're available to use them. The 0.4, if the teacher at Twilight, how many hours does a teacher at Sloan, how many hours a day are they contracted to teach the Sloan program?
Same hours as normal, as any regular ed teacher.
So when they continue on to teach the Twilight program, what do we pay?
They don't. We have a separate teacher that we hire to do the Twilight program.
And is that teacher separate from the district? That's the only program they do?
What's the teacher schedule for that teacher this year, Dr. Lambert? Sorry? The Twilight teacher, what's the teacher schedule?
Twilight coordinator?
Yes.
The Twilight coordinator is a position, it's a 0.6 position, and that person spends their time working with the teachers of the classes where the students are coming from to gather the work, to coordinate taking exams, coordinating the tutors that have to come in to teach the kids.
A teacher also teaches another 0.4 schedule at the high school.
Correct.
Well, maybe that's my point, which is maybe that's not the teacher to be doing it. I don't know the person, I'm not casting aspersions, but maybe if we need that thing to run concurrently with the other time that they're teaching, maybe we need a different 0.6 person.
That teacher holds a certification, and doesn't hold certification to teach all the subjects that need to be taught. So the person who's the coordinator of the program, for example, may have a social studies certification. They can't teach the math, the science, and the English courses. So that's why we have to bring in the other tutors.
I just want to be clear that what we've done, and it's somewhat ironic that this conversation is coming between the two of us, because usually you're on the other side of this equation, is we've tried to make this work seamlessly so that we have reduced the amount of cost we apply to the Twilight, so that we're not hiring extra counselor, we're not hiring extra teachers, we're working in and out of what the schedules are, we're asking teachers to report, and the teacher who is part of the Twilight coordinator is spending her time during part of that school day communicating with teachers when they are there, so that she can get assignments, or he can get assignments depending on the year, to make sure that the kids are following that schedule and following their routines. If we move to a day schedule, no one said we couldn't do that. It will just be at added cost. We will have to find another 0.2 counselor. We will have to not be able to attach a 0.6 teacher to a current teaching load, and those things may be more difficult to do, and we'll have to find subject level experts.
And that's where I'm having a little, maybe I just have a little cognitive blunt on this thing, which says that the 0.2 I'm paying someone to come there afterwards, or a different 0.2 that I would hire during the day, how are those different expenses?
The tutors that come in get paid at a very significantly different rate than the hourly rate of a teacher who's teaching via contract.
All right,
I don't know what the figure is for the...
and those people aren't available during the day?
Right, they're not getting a 0.2 teacher salary, they're getting a per hour salary for the time we need them.
And there is not a hourly teaching tutor available during the day?
That we wouldn't be able to use our folks, which is part of what helps to mesh the program and the curriculum. You're taking a math teacher at one of the high schools who's coming in and working on it.
I can say that we have had experience, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We've had experience where we have students who are on homebound instruction, which is completely different, and for whatever reasons, the family needs us to provide that instruction during the school day. For us to find tutors to tutor those kids is extremely difficult.
That's fine. I was just, I guess the part of the discussion that I really, you know, the 45 days out, to me, you do the crime, you do the time. To me, though, the part that struck home was putting a child who was already at risk in that large gap of time, unsupervised. That struck home to me, and that's what I was trying to fill. That's why I'm asking the questions I am.
Okay. Other comments?
Can we just go back to the 45 days for a second? Mr. Reed, do you agree?
Yes.
Okay, that was easy.
Yes, the board, it's the board's discretion, which can't be arbitrary or capricious, but it's your
So
discretion.
the key there is
That wasn't the
arbitrary.
impression I get, so maybe I just misunderstood.
Well, I
our
think-
solicitor's instructions at the time.
I think the arbitrary part is maybe, we probably shouldn't have this discussion in public because it's pertinent to a specific set of circumstances. But if you think back, one of the considerations was arbitrary. So if you have certain groups of people who have the same thing happen to them, do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm listening, yeah.
That same thing happened to them, and one student gets one thing, and another student, seemingly same set of circumstances, gets something different. That is where we run into trouble.
Because the policy says 45 days. and
No,
we're adjusting.
because you're treating two students in the same situation differently, correct?
Probably.
Well, so.
I was very definitive.
Let's ask the question, if the policy said up to 45 days, does that change that requirement of?
No. 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 Policy's fine, and the board has the discretion to determine the exclusion or decide not to exclude the student,
As long as it's not arbitrary,
as long as their decision isn't arbitrary or capricious.
that's where we got hung up.
So not really, is the answer.
They didn't count that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, Mrs. Thompson.
Yes, Mrs. Sexton.
If we're finished with these two items, do you think we are?
I think we could vote on them.
Mark?
We're not voting on this item.
218.
Okay, no, we're not done with them, Mrs. Sexton.
Apparently not.
Thank you. Mr. Abramson.
No, with regard to that email I sent, with regard to that one word,
I prefer not to change it right now, Mr. Abramson, but you and I can talk about it. And again, then we have to bring the whole policy up for board review.
yeah, but well, you know what my concern is about it.
Yeah, I don't think it changes the intent of the policy, but I'll call you tomorrow or Monday and we'll talk.
Mr. Block.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to look at other alternatives. I want to have the biggest deterrent out there. I want to, make a statement about how serious we are, but I believe that keeping kids out of the school environment as a punishment, there's got to be a better way to have the deterrent, to punish bad behavior, and still, focus on the education of the kids. So if we can work to find something like that, that's what I advocate.
Mrs. Sexton.
So this has nothing to do with all of this.
Okay.
In the audience, we have a Northampton Township Supervisor and a Township Manager who I assume are here for a discussion about LERTA. It is 9:35. We've been here 2
Okay.
hours and 5 minutes, and we have not made it to the consent agenda. Maybe we could do that and send
Okay.
them home.
Thank you, Mrs. Sexton. I do appreciate that. Are there other comments on 218? Because this is not a voting item. Okay.
Oh, I just wanted to echo what Andy said, that in kind of what Jerry was getting at. It'd be nice if we could do better, and I read the memo that there are some things we're working on, so I just wanted to put my encouragement. Let's continue to think about how to do the online part and think about the daytime part. So.
Okay. Are we good? Anyone else? Okay, so we are going to briefly go to board items and bring up the top of LERTA, which means Local Economic Revitalization Tax Assistance. And I'd like to just indulge me for 1 minute to give everyone the history here. We were contacted by the Northampton supervisors, or some of them, and asked to do a consideration, to consider approving something that would allow tax deferment, or not deferment, tax
Abatement.
abatement for a number of years based on somebody improving a property, and I'm sure I didn't fully explain that. But my purpose on putting it on under board items was that we had this discussion at the Finance Committee meeting, correct, Dr. Foster? And I don't think I didn't hear a consensus for anything or a next step. And the Northampton supervisor asked me, well, what's the next step going to be? Is the board going to consider it? Are they not going to consider it, et cetera? So I said that I would put it on as a topic and say to this board, what do you want to do next? I did hear the following things, so I'm throwing them out. I heard that we want to have this gentleman come and publicly present at one of our board meetings what they presented to us at Finance. I heard that some people like the proposal as submitted and would like to see that on the agenda, and some people wanted a modification of the proposal and would like to see that on the agenda, and some people weren't in favor of it at all. So we need to know a next step. These people have somewhat been waiting for an answer from us, and I don't think at the conclusion of that facility meeting, I didn't hear a consensus. What would this board like to do next? Mrs. Sexton.
We asked at that time for Mr. Reinhardt to give us an overview in finance of what that really means for us. We have kept him very, very busy on capital plan issues over the past little bit of time. So he says that he is almost there with those figures for us. And if we could put them on the agenda for a finance meeting, we could talk about that piece of it, and then maybe we would be ready to do something more public.
So
they're welcome to come and talk.
The next finance meeting.
With him.
The next finance meeting is October 30th, 31st, 30th? No? When's the next finance meeting, please? The 30th of October. Well, it's okay with me. I'm just trying to...
So can I ask something?
Mr. Brock?
Because I was not at the first meeting to hear the presentation. I don't necessarily have an opinion one way or the other, but Mr. Reinhardt was kind enough to
Speaking to the mic.
answer some questions. I apologize. It's the Penn State Rutgers voice loss. Go
wow, that was last Saturday, Mr. Brock.
It was a long game. A good outcome. And I apologize to my dear friends from Rutgers. Can we act on abatement in terms of one-off situations without developing a perspective in general? And the reason I asked that was how quickly we have to consider and get to a decision. Because if the reality is we can consider one-offs, my view would be...
You probably want to ask the attorney rather than
yeah.
the business manager.
Yes.
What would a one-off be?
If somebody wanted an abatement on a project,
Okay.
could they come to us for that versus us saying, and I don't know, that's why I'm asking. So for me, if that's allowable, we can put it off.
You'd have hearings every 20 minutes. If it were possible, you'd be hearing it forever and ever.
I just think that takes away from what the intent of that is all about. I mean, it's supposed to be something for a community. I think it's complicated to...
Statutory process that has to be gone through.
No, the only reason I asked the question is to guide my sense of urgency around how quickly to have the meeting, having not sat through the process.
Your question is an example of why we need him to do a meeting with us.
It's my understanding after the last meeting that there were certain questions and we were going to get information back, which I have not seen anything.
I maybe misunderstood that, so that could be my error.
I'm just saying what my perception of what the finance meeting where that conversation took place, I believe that there were some questions, that there was going to be some exchange of information that was shared with the board that we were then going to have another discussion at a finance meeting and then bring to a regular meeting for vote. I haven't seen any additional information.
Is that information from Mr. Reinhardt or for somebody else?
No, I believe it was from the township.
For me, first of all, Mr. Reinhardt was doing an analysis and has not turned it to the board.
Okay.
I had requested a number of items from the township to be reviewed. I've received some of them. I've received the Excel spreadsheet, which documents the individual items that are included within the tax area considered. Some idea of what has happened in the past 5 years. I had asked for the contact information for the people from the Bucks County Development Authority because I wanted to follow up conversations with them. I had asked for a Word copy of the resolution that had been provided to us for the meeting so that if we were to think that we would craft a resolution slightly different than this for our own, that we'd have that. And I'd also asked for enlargements of the diagrams that were provided on paper because they were a little small, it's hard to identify. For me, at this point, one of my concerns, and I mentioned this in the Finance Committee, was this is one township of our 5 communities. And I will, in full disclosure, the township has, Northampton Township has now passed the LERTA proposal, which would give, and if I get it wrong, someone is welcome to correct me, that this proposal is for the community is it gives landowners of commercial property in certain defined areas within Northampton Township the ability to request an abatement for 5 years of taxes for the value increased in their assessment because of some improvement within that area. And that would go from when they get the abatement, it would run for 5 years, just on the incremental value. And the program, as it was defined by the township, has a 5-year window that within that window you can start and request your abatement, and it will run for 5 years. My issue within that is it just came up earlier with Amy Fitzpatrick, got a wrong name before, but Amy Fitzpatrick's question about who's my board representative. And my problem is we represent 5 communities, and I don't want to find this board approving it for one community, and then another community comes in with a different structure. Maybe Newtown Township comes in and says we want to work within our development area or our downtown area, or the borough does something. I don't want to find us trying to agree to individual plans all along the way that are different and maybe putting certain towns at advantages and others at disadvantage. So for the question of come back in October is fine to have the discussion when we have Bob Reinhardt's conclusions. We can look at these things ourselves. For me, looking at the plan as it is now, I don't know that it achieves the goals that I, as one member of the community, would want to have for that development. It rewards the assessment increase from the base that it's at, whatever that assessment is above that. It can be structured so many different ways. It could be rewarded, you can structure it, and we have the power to write our own version of LERTA to structure it that says only those improvements in the assessment that begin over 50% of what you did are abated, so that people who do routine or incremental changes wouldn't get the abatement, but if you made a substantial abatement. For me, the other big problem in the program as it was presented was those properties that are already slated for potential development were included. So those programs or projects that might be multi-million-dollar projects, which are already under concept or under plan or underway, maybe not shovel-ready as it was a couple years ago, but ready to go soon, would also be included. And so the incremental value to the district is we lose the taxes, as the township's plan was. If someone put up a $4 million or $6 million commercial building on a property which is already ready for construction, and they're ready soon to build, we'll lose the taxes on $4 to $6 million of the assessed value.
So I think therein is, so I've heard Mrs. Exman say, let's talk about it in Finance October. You're okay with that, but really you don't want to do it, so.
I'm fine to discuss it. I don't want to do it as written. So I think we need to
Okay.
talk about it in
You need more
finance to talk
discussion.
about
Okay. I just want to be clear.
what achieves the goals for the
is that-
district.
To your point, I just want to say, my reading of that meeting is there were 2 folks that probably were going to be no with this proposal. It just wasn't going to happen unless it was only this part of Northampton, or it was restructured to be these many years or whatever. What Northampton passed, no matter how much data we get or how long we discuss it, I think there were a couple of votes that were no. I think there were a couple of votes that were yes for what was passed, and that's not going to change. But that's a long ways away from 5. And so, I don't know what process is best to get us to 5, whether it's the finance or whether we can even get there, or whether people, if they would spend more time just going to talk with the representatives from Northampton before we have that meeting. Because the last meeting went, on and on as our meetings do, and I think some of this information could be got more efficiently and perspective by just dialing direct.
The only, I have, any board member can go direct anytime they want. The only thing I think is if somebody gets a piece of information, it'd be great if this whole board had it. That's my only 2 cents on that piece of it. But unless I hear otherwise, and and give these gentlemen some direction, is that we will bring this up as a topic, at least for Mr. Reinhardt's presentation piece, and then a discussion at the finance meeting in October. Dr. Foster, you're the chair of that committee. Is that acceptable to you?
That's absolutely fine. But if
Okay.
people can do their homework ahead of time, that would be helpful.
Procedurally,
In
let
the
me just,
3 minutes we have free on Sunday, we'll be sure to do that.
let me, can I
Dr.
just,
Mr. Reinhardt,
Okay.
are you okay with October 31st? Okay. 30th, sorry, not Halloween.
And you
Okay.
gentlemen could probably come and visit us before then to speak.
Well, you
When?
can speak
They
at public
want to
comment
do that.
anytime you want.
procedurally, let me just give you a heads up on how this goes. There are 3 bodies that need to approve the program, and they need to approve it in similar form. And the 3 bodies are the township, in this case Northampton Township, who has approved it. And they're not, they don't have to happen in this order.
It's the 3 taxing bodies.
The school board, and then the county commissioners, because this abatement is presumably going to provide all 3 levels of abatement.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this discussion will happen at the October 30th Finance Committee, and based on the results of that discussion, it will potentially come up for vote at a school board meeting after that.
And I made the plea for homework because the Finance Committee, the discussion is very likely to center on facts and figures around how much potential value at risk is there in the different regions. But some of the concerns really are philosophical and political, and we can't get into them at finance. They don't belong there. And so that's my plea. If there's a political issue, like I don't like this project, or I don't like that developer, or whatever, it has to be dealt with elsewhere. So
I'm
Okay.
assuming there's no time restriction here? We don't need to do this
This
in any
evening?
certain,
Oh.
no, with the municipality.
I'm sorry.
Are we allowed to talk?
Of course,
Yes, I mean.
I think, I should leave that to the president.
It's out of order, but
So my name is Barry Moore from Northampton Township, 65 West Norton Drive. I'm also a Northampton supervisor. Thank you very much for the opportunity. There are a lot of details that need to be explained to this board. We went through the Board of Supervisors and discussed this issue very extensively and thought about it. And I think at the end of the day, when all the facts are known and we can give you all the information you need to make a decision, I feel very confident that you'll make a decision going forward with LERTA. But right now, I agree with you. You don't have the right information. So we're very happy to wait until the October 30th meeting. We'll meet with your Finance Committee. We'll give all the information they need to have to go through that. Then I would like to have the opportunity to come back to this board, present the whole proposal for LERTA, and then any questions that you have or any questions that the public would have, be certainly willing to answer those questions. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions of me or any of the board members or Bob Pellegrino, please feel free to give us a call. I know it's a very confusing issue. All we're trying to do is basically revitalize downtown Richboro, Holland, and the industrial park. And we think by doing so with the LERTA program, in addition to revitalizing those areas, we also can generate new income. And what's happened now is we went back to the data, looked 10 years ago, and we found out that assessments actually went down. So we've actually lost money. The school district lost money, the county lost money, and the township lost money because the assessed values of those properties have gone down, therefore the taxes collected have gone down. We've also lost opportunity with jobs. We have less people employed in those areas. All we're saying is that's something, it's a double benefit. We can revitalize our town, we also can increase revenue.
thank you.
But I'll do that at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will have that discussion at the finance meeting, and thank you, gentlemen, for staying. Okay, we're going to go back to our agenda. We're going to move to the consent agenda, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Sexton to make the motion.
Wait a second. Can I just ask that you say that it's subject to solicitor review?
I could say that. I move to approve the consent agenda items A through H as contained in the attachments to the agenda, subject to audit and solicitor review.
Second.
Well done, Pat.
Any cause for contention? Mr. Grubb, you're looking at me.
I'll let him
Go,
start.
Mr. Biley, go ahead.
I'll be voting with the exception of the treasurer's report.
As is common, I still question why we pre-fund or make the agreements with the junior prom. And it causes an interesting question. And when you look at it, and maybe this is a standard fare for me, I noticed there that in each of these agreements for the Hyatt, Princeton, that we get 2 rooms set aside that aren't going to be used because they're going to be used by the photographer. It makes an interesting question. And the interesting question is, what photographer? It's not a photographer that this board has approved. It's not a photographer that takes the pictures and shares the money with the school district. But it's and people will tell you what the rooms are free. Well, the rooms aren't free because somehow they're baked, nothing's free in a commercial establishment. So those 2 vacant rooms that are set aside for the photographer to take pictures are somehow included in our cost because we're paying for the other part of the room. If they're free, that comes with. They don't, if I went to the Hyatt and asked for the rooms for free and nothing else was going on, they wouldn't give them to me. So they're obviously baked into the cost.
When we take over the entire Hyatt for our junior prom, who do you think is going to rent those 2 rooms out?
You know what? But if I go to the Hyatt and ask for the rooms now, just for tonight, they won't give them to me. So they're not free. They have a value, and that's their problem.
Who pays for the prom? Isn't it paid for by the tickets sold?
Who pays for the photographer?
The kids?
And we supplement them by paying for the room because the room is...
We're not paying for the room. Their tickets are paying for the room. Do you know how much it costs to go to the prom
How
these
much?
days?
Not recently.
You haven't been
I guess
asked?
my question
Oh,
is,
sorry.
and you never asked me. I guess my query here really went to the photographer, which was, we don't know, the board doesn't approve the photographer. The photographers are making profit on the students. And it kind of goes a funny way, which is, how'd we get there? Because this is kind of where we went a couple years ago with the rings. The rings are still in question, you know, high school rings. So, you know, Herf Jones has that deal. Is it still Herf Jones, or are we dealing with somebody else now?
No, still them.
It's Herf Jones who has the exclusive access to the building to sell school rings. Because Jostens may be cheaper? I don't know, because we never found out. Because we obligate the kids, if they're gonna buy a school ring, buy it here.
Well, when it comes to the proms,
So I'm gonna vote, I'll approve everything, but I'm not gonna approve the proms.
Okay.
But I think that we keep doing the same damn thing. The other thing that does merit acknowledgement, while it's here recognized, we still don't get money for it, as far as I know, that the PDE approval for Plan Con K, for which building?
This is for the refinancing of our bond issues.
Okay.
We actually reduced our costs, so therefore the state reduces their reimbursement to us.
So
it's
they're
just-
acknowledging they're gonna pay us less, and well, they're not paying us at all right
Yes.
now. Okay.
okay, can we call the,
I
Dr.
just-
Foster, I'm sorry, I thought you were trying to get me to call the question.
No,
I
no,
misunderstood,
I'm
sorry.
I'm sorry. I'll frown more than that. Okay. So
Thank you.
This is for Dr. Lambert. So there had been a settlement agreement in a prior version of this agenda, and because I remember reading it, but now it's not here, and I didn't know whether you wanted it to be here or whether it went away.
I am very, very sorry. I sent an email. There were some questions that came in today and some other issues of my own with the agreement that I
Okay,
wasn't
that's fine.
comfortable,
It's just
so I
pulled.
pulled it, and I
That's
notified
great.
some people, forgot to notify the rest of
Okay,
you. I'm sorry.
that's fine.
It will come
Thanks.
back to you in October.
Okay.
Bob, can you just update us briefly on the gas lock price and what's going on there?
Yes. We locked in for, I think, a year and a half for natural gas and our electric generation. Prices have gone down quite a bit. If you remember, you locked into the heat rate earlier this year, and now gas prices have gone down considerably, and we're doing very well with it. The heating, natural gas for heating is about $300,000 a year is what it's going to cost us. And the electric generation is about $1.4 million a year. And these are some of the achievements we make as we purchase gas and generation at proper times. So this is underneath our budget, and we're going to be able to show positive budget because of that.
Good job. Okay, can we please have a roll call vote?
Mrs. McKessie?
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Abramson?
Yes.
Mrs. Brooks?
Yes.
Mr. Bilek?
Yes, with the exception of F, Treasurer's Report.
Dr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Grupp?
With the exception of C, the junior proms, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next item, Mr. Block.
I move to approve the retainer agreement with Mr. Fred D'Angelo as contained in the attachment to this agenda, but it is
There's
not
no attachment.
attached.
Right.
It's,
I'll second for the purposes of conversation.
it's,
Thank you, Larry.
yeah, it's not attached because it hasn't yet fully been revised, but it's
So we're not
it's
voting
like
on it?
Chuck Lambert's. You can vote subject to solicitor review, but, you know, if you're not comfortable with that, then, yeah.
I'd rather table it and read it.
Yeah, I agree. Motion to table?
Motion to table.
Second?
Second.
Okay, keep going.
Vote by unanimous acclaim.
Sorry. Well, yes, Secretary, please record the vote as passing by unanimous consent. Hearing no dissent was supposed to be in there too, but, okay, next item, Ms. McKessie.
I move to approve the personnel actions as contained in the attachment to this agenda.
Second.
Any questions for Ms. Trioli?
No, but I will be voting no on the EDRPPs.
Is there anyone that raises to specific interest or just in general?
Just in general right now.
Any other comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Brooks?
Yes.
Mr. Bialik?
Yes.
Dr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Grupp?
Yes.
Mrs. McKessie?
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton?
Yes on the personnel items, no on the EDRPPs.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Abramson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Item number 3, Mrs. Brooks.
I move to approve the schedule of facility use changes as authorized under Board Policy 707 as contained in the attachment to this agenda.
Second.
Last year, we did a rewrite of Policy 707, and we took out the fees simply because it's cumbersome to keep reauthorizing the policy every year when we simply want to change the fees. So we moved the fee schedule to an administrative regulation and put in the policy that each year we would take a look at these. Mr. Grubb suggested a good one that I make sure I show you what the use fees were for last year and what they are for this year. So I put in front of you a copy. In red is the use fees for this year. Those that are in red are changed, and behind that is a copy of what the schedule looked like last year. You can see we've differentiated the fees a little bit more. We've raised them in many cases, and the purpose of getting this approval now is to make sure that we can advise our users of the changes in the fee structure for our facility use fees over the course of the year. So this is brought before you. It's been vetted through our facilities department and the folks who do our facility use, most particularly Mrs. Borgia, who does a fantastic job scheduling and managing these uses. Happy to answer any questions for you.
It's really not directly pertinent to this, but it's related. So with the talk of the capital planning, there was a letter that went out to folks that use our auditoriums for functions that said that Richboro Middle School might not be available in the very near future, and that they should think, where else to go. And obviously that's not going to be true in the very near future. So
I'm not aware of that letter.
yeah,
Dr.
it
Foster.
definitely went out, and it caused a lot of consternation. It came from Council Rock. So
I'll look into it.
Okay.
It could have been, I think it might easily have been just a letter because of the renovations we were doing at Richboro Middle School over the course of the summer into the early part of this year. But I will check on that.
okay, and then my impression is it's very hard to get high school auditoriums available for folks to rent. Is that
That's true.
That's true?
We
Is
have
there a
so
way
many
for us
uses
to
that
make
our
it?
own kids use there between.
I mean, even after school kind of ends, it's tough.
Once we start a Golden Wings or a Sock and Buskin performance, they take over that stage and auditorium for that period of time. Then when we give those up, you have stage uses as we go into the concert season that are set up for orchestra, band. It's not that, I think Mrs. Borges is fantastic about scheduling it in, but it's hard sometimes during the school year, most particularly, to get people to be able to use our auditoriums.
And I'm just asking, there's a particular group that needs auditoriums in, late June?
Those usually aren't hard for them to
and
get.
for whatever reason, it's been very difficult for them to get it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If there is a specific frustration from a specific person, have them touch base with me, and I'll facilitate the conversation with Mrs. Borgia.
Thanks.
Mark, on this list, the only item that strikes me as being not appropriate was the fees charged around the all-designated wrestling rooms. and here's why. I am concerned that, at what, go ahead, what?
I was just thinking of our conversation today. It's,
Oh, yeah, it's standard.
yeah, standard cherry.
It's a standard chair. And my concern really relates to, we had incidents where we had to pay particular attention to cleaning of the mats regarding tropical, dermatological problems or disease passing. And so I guess my dilemma in looking at this is, I don't think that either the 10 for the community use or the 100 for the nonprofit it should include mandatory 1 hour of cleaning time from our staff, because I think that having people use those facilities, we monitor it rather closely. We monitor our athletes rather closely for dermatological diseases. I don't know that that'll happen outside, and I'd like you to consider raising those fees.
I would represent to you that the people that use that, most particularly Council Rock Wrestling Association, are very good about doing exactly what you speak to, cleaning forward, and then they would be responsible, not just the $10, but understand the majority of their uses come at a time when they would be responsible for custodial fees also, which would come on top of that.
And will that include sufficient time to clean and disinfect? That was my primary, well, because I'm just concerned that so many of the other fees, there's not a lot of cleaning and disinfecting that goes on with a high school or elementary school classroom. It's a manual process to clean and disinfect because those mats have to be deployed to be cleaned and then rolled up. It is not an easy task. And I don't know if the one person is...
Well, during the time that they use it, in fairness, Mr. Gruff, their mats don't get rolled back up. For the most part, they're using wrestling rooms where the mats remain in place during the wrestling season. And those, some of the odds, Jim and Mr. Desco might know better, will keep the mat there either all year or at least for the wrestling season, and then roll it back up for when other uses might take place, cheerleading or other things like that. So, but I do think that's covered in the overview of what that association does for us.
And following that same logic, and I don't know we ever asked for it, but the use of the large gyms at the high schools, does that include the use of things like the mats, which would be brought down, or does that not? Does the rental of a gym include that?
I would tell you that the use of our large gyms at both high schools is very rare facility use. Because we have so many school-based activities, from volleyball in the fall to the basketball and then to volleyball again, where it's very seldom that an outside group is using the master gyms at both North and South.
Okay.
But yeah, I would represent to you that Council Rock Wrestling, on at least one weekend, we run a major tournament where those mats will come down, but they'll be responsible for all the cleaning and the responsibilities of putting those back up when it's done, including the custodial time that it takes to do that.
And was it the intention to reduce the fees for the auditorium for non-community for profit? Or are you reduced it from 500 to 300, but now include the caveat about the participation?
It was about the amount of time that we were doing it. You got 500, and then I think it was 150 for successive hours. We just decided to make it one platform.
So you reduced it to 300.
Right, because the initial practice was to do 500, but it was then the successive hours were charged at a lesser rate.
I hear that, and I guess my concern, having spoken with the people who run those auditoriums, is that some of the features that are available in the auditorium, such as light bulbs, theatrical light bulbs, are very short duration, and I don't know that lowering the price.
Well, it gives us more revenue, so that you know the $300 per hour is the better deal for us than what the 500 was, and then the 150 for successive hours. Whatever it was our initial practice, it was 500 according to what I had the conversation with Mrs. Borgia, and then we had 150 for successive hours, and then after 4 more hours, you had another 500. That 500 that's there initially versus the 300 per hour, that's what we changed it to get more revenue out of that.
So it's just 300 per hour now?
Right.
Yes.
Right, rather than the 500
It's not marked
per
as
use.
per hour.
It is with the 3 asterisks.
Where does it say per hour?
I'm sorry.
It does not say per hour.
I read it as per hour too, but
It
it
should be
doesn't
per
say
hour.
hour on it.
Okay, then you'll amend that to
Yes.
be per hour? That's a big difference. And last question along this line of reasoning, which is, the funds collected from this do not accrue in general terms to the school providing the facility. It accrues to the general fund. Is that true?
No, it's not true. And Mr. Reinhardt, I just ask you to comment on that. Mr. Grupp asked what happens with the fees that we collect on the facilities, and there is a revenue sharing process on this, correct?
Yes. We get all the fees, and the schools, we allowed to have 10% to put into an area where they can accumulate funds so that they can make improvements or maintenance to their auditoriums and gymnasiums.
I hear that, and I appreciate that. It doesn't need board approval. I'd ask you to reconsider that allotment, that split, particularly for when there are consumables used, such as in the auditoriums for the light bulbs and whatnot, that the return goes a little higher.
It absolutely will. And I mean, we work with those folks to put the money back in that they need. It's more, in some ways, this 10% is discretionary to help them spruce up both of those spaces. Because particularly in the two high schools and at Newtown Middle School, those auditoriums get used a lot. And we recognize because of that, we want to put some money back in their hands to be able to do some things in those spaces.
So you are amending this then to have that the auditorium is $300 per hour. Who
Yes.
made the motion? Who made the motion?
Mrs. Brooks?
Yes.
So you accept that
Who
modification?
seconded it?
Yes.
Who seconded?
I think I did, yes.
Thank you.
Acceptable? Okay.
Yes.
Hearing no objections for the way the motion is amended, I ask the secretary to record the motion as passing by unanimous consent. Mr. Abramson, item number 4.
I move to correct the musical instrument bid number 14-34 previously awarded at the August 21st, 2014 meeting of the Board of School Directors to reflect the award of the Miraphone tuba to music and arts at a cost of $6,834 and the microphone stands to Sam Ash at a cost of $28.50.
Second.
The original award was determined by the music coordinator. After going back to the schools, he realized that he awarded the incorrect tuba and also the microphone stands, and he asked us to correct it. So I just came back to you to ask you to correct it. Both of them are less priced than previously.
Approved. Okay, hearing no objection. Okay, Mr. Abramson.
No, I'm going to vote, I'll vote no.
Okay, so can we have a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Grupp,
Yes.
Mrs. McKessie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Block,
Yes.
Mr. Abramson,
No.
no, Mrs. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Bilek.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Grupp, item number 5.
I'm looking at the wrong thing. I move to award the 2014-2015 air filter bid number 14-37 to Lorab Incorporated at a total cost not to exceed $17,146.52, subject to audit.
Second.
Mr. Reinhardt, have anything to say about air filters?
Each year, we determine the inventory of air filters and we go out and we bid air filters. Last year, we purchased 446 air filters. This year, we're purchasing 528 air filters. Various prices, and if you have any questions, I can answer them, but that's probably the best I can do unless you ask a specific question about an air filter.
Okay, hearing no objections, I ask for the secretary to record the motion as passing by unanimous consent. Dr. Foster.
How come they're none for good now?
Pardon me?
They're none for good now?
That would make sense, because everything will be new and good mill beginning next year. Correct, Mr. Taylor?
That's correct.
Sir?
Sorry, it was just stump the Rob.
Dr. Foster, could you do item number 6, please?
It'd be my great honor to read this motion. I move to approve the agreement between Council Rock School District and Mr. Robert Reinhardt according to the terms and conditions set forth in the attachment to this agenda.
Second.
I simply want to give you a quick overview. We've been lucky enough to have Bob going on 5 years now. His agreement runs in June. thought it was important to get this done and get it done early to make sure that we could show our support for Mr. Reinhardt. This is a matter of although I'm sure he's going to be embarrassed by this, but when you look at the increase in the salary, which is 1.2%, consistent with the Council Rock Administrators Association, also keep in mind that he's given back in the last 4 years almost $10,000 because he's refused to take the stipend that the board treasurer should get at $2,500 apiece. So I think we all agree Bob is a value-added member of the staff, does a fantastic job on a daily basis, and I strongly recommend that the board renew that contract for another 5 years.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Whether you wanted the job. That was our main question.
Yeah.
We brought that. Do you want to stay?
Don't say anything now before we vote on this.
Yeah.
Nothing you say now is going to help your cause.
Yes, I want to keep my job.
All right then.
You've done a great job, and we will continue to heavily rely on you in these upcoming months with everything we're looking at, and we really appreciate the work that you do.
I appreciate
Sincerely.
everyone's support, and I really feel like I get it quite a bit.
The time's gone quickly, hasn't it?
So we're going to take a roll call vote,
Yes.
so we can each have the opportunity to vote on this amendment, please. Amendment, motion, sorry.
Mr. Block,
Yes, congratulations, Bob, thank you.
Mr. Abramson,
Yes.
Mrs. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Bialik,
Yes.
Dr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Grupp,
I'm going to absolutely agree.
Mrs. McKessie,
Yes.
Mrs. Sexton,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Thank you.
You brought the board together.
Okay, any solicitors report?
I have nothing beyond the written report. Answer any questions you might have. I'm not aware of any exec session you may have had.
No.
And that's it.
Okay, before we move to Mr. Block, go ahead, this is minor, but I think we heard a conversation from the audience, and I'm sure it's going to come out in public comment, so I just want to give the board an opportunity to comment on mailing a letter home regarding the capital planning dates and things. Is there any board will to do that?
How many people get mail from the district? Because it would have to go to all taxpayers. That's go to all electors.
Well, there are 70, I just did some quick math here, 72,500 in our district. So if you figure,
Well, I'm thinking
2.5
there's
per
about
household.
28,000 tax parcels, so I'm thinking about 28,000 to 29,000.
So it's 14.
okay, that's exactly where it was, 28.
It's 14,000. It's gonna be-
$28,000, is that what you're saying?
No,
28,000.
28,000 homes.
Right.
Okay.
And what's your group rate for, what's
Do you have any idea of mailing
what's
cost?
the mailing cost?
Well, right now, we have that pre-sorted mailing, and I think it might be 42 cents or something like that.
So at 40 cents times 40, that's $16,000. What did you say, 28 parcels? So it's called 30, so it's $12,000 plus the printing and stuffing. So we're just gonna send, can we just send a postcard, which will be cheaper?
Well, so I would say to you, the meeting, there's meetings listed will be on the Saturday, and then we're 2 weeks out from that in October, and, I mean, in realistic time, it's not going out before next week.
Yeah.
But I'm asking the question if, so,
I mean, not only do people
Okay,
not read
so-
email, but they throw their junk mail away.
I don't
you know?
think-
I-
This may be unpopular. I do not think we need to mail everyone and tell them we're having a meeting. I mean, this is the way of the world. If you didn't know something was happening in your local community, in the world, you don't necessarily get mail about it. This is being talked about. It's
advertised
in the paper.
papers.
It's advertised in multiple publications. We're encouraging people to be on the listserv, even if they're not
Right.
part of our community. I mean, this opens a floodgate. We can't be that. Some people have to take ownership that they have to find information. And just personally, I do not think that this is worthy of a mailing.
Let me split the baby in the bathwater, so we don't throw them both away. How much, Chris English from the press, you don't know exactly, what's a quarter-page ad in the Courier go
That's
for?
exactly
Or
what
an
I was gonna say.
eighth-page ad in
Good
the Courier go
compliment.
for? It's got to be less than $1,000, I would imagine. Okay.
He doesn't sell advertising, he reports on what you say. Okay.
So I would be in favor of a quarter or an eighth page advertisement in the Courier or, you're not Kerry, or the Newtown Advance together, because I think that reaches an audience that we don't reach, because there are people who are not with kids in the school who may be reading the paper and don't follow this and go, this is interesting to me.
And that's a much more reasonable cost.
Okay, so if someone makes a motion to put an ad basically saying what's going to go out on listserv, same thing, rate half page, with not to exceed $1,000, and look at the Courier and the Advance. That's what I
I don't
heard.
think we need to make a motion. It's under $3,000 expense. The administration can take it on their own volition to do that sort of expenditure.
Okay, does anybody on
So
this
we're
board?
talking about putting like that picture of the dates of the meetings?
Whatever you
As an
were
ad?
going to design that would go on the web, we would take exactly
What you
that
see
same
in listserv
snapshot.
tomorrow. So if you don't like it, we'll be able to talk about it on Saturday, in fairness. Because then we can just ship that exact piece off to the community.
But Mark, I mean, that's within your discretion to do it, but I think I'm not hearing an objection from the board.
Understood.
Thank you, I'm not either.
Don't forget that Chris's article on tonight's meeting is going to...
Big, bold article, Chris.
Chris
Front
doesn't know how
page.
much it costs to...
Okay, all right, I felt like the public would leave without us having had the discussion. I'm glad we did, because I think that's a good and reasonable idea. So I just wanted under board items to finish that up. Having delayed Mr. Block already, he is here to give an update to all of us and for discussion on the board initiatives that we put together. We started our workshop back whenever, and Mr. Block's going to bring us up to date.
Yep, and apologies, this has been on several agendas, and between some of the priorities items in here that we've been working on and some of the recent events, it's gotten pushed back. So what I wanted to do was talk about some of the objectives that the board aligned on. Here's a summary timeline to bring the public up to speed on the work that we've done. In the spring of 2014, the board aligned on priorities, and we shared those with the public in March. In the summer of 2014, Mr. Klein delivered an action plan against those priorities, and the work begins. Today, we're going to have a formal board and public update as to where we stand. Through the fall, the work will continue, and a lot of these priorities were to create plans as a district with certain deliverables. Those will start to be implemented next year, and specifically by item, I'll talk about what those look like. So as a reminder, here are the 2014 board priorities that we aligned on. The first one obviously has gotten the most attention, arguably from a financial standpoint and academic standpoint, the most important. I know there's a notion out there perhaps that we're looking at taking action without necessarily a plan. The purpose of the discussion is indeed to develop a long-term plan for facilities and capital expenditures. So all of the discussions that we're having now, all the debate that we're having now is to get us to a place where we have a plan and make good decisions that make good academic and financial sense for the district. The second board priority is to develop and implement an academic scorecard that's going to help us set goals and measure our performance academically. In addition, we need to prepare for collective bargaining. And then lastly, we need to, or agreed to, complete a comprehensive review of our administration's capabilities, its capacities, its structure, and develop recommendation for possible adjustments, which would certainly include a succession plan for the superintendent, key administrators, and for principals. So this is a bit of an eye chart, but Mr. Klein, I would assume that this is going to be posted with the agenda, posted online, the update, so folks could see that if they can't see it. Here.
I'm not sure where to post it, Mr. Block.
Just attach it to the agenda
Yeah,
under this topic?
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, and then I guess ultimately what we'd probably want to do is have a section on our website somewhere that talked about
You're
our
in charge
objectives.
of that, Mr. Block.
Sure, we can do that. So what this shows is a timeline starting in June. It breaks out each of the primary actions and timelines. I'll start from the bottom up, which is the capital planning objective. The planning committee delivered its goals in June. We've started to talk about what a 5-year plan could look like through July, August, and September. In the month of October, we'll have public hearings. We've scheduled a tentative vote on a plan in November, and then moving forward from that is what I have as implementation planning. So depending on some of the decisions that we make, it could require more actions. As an example, if we wanted to move forward with potential school closures, there's different things that the state requires us to go through. So theoretically, we would then start to stage our plan to start to execute, possibly with next year's school year. A lot of this is a work in progress as we build towards this November 6th date and possibly beyond. The collective bargaining piece is blank because a lot of that discussion happens in executive session. As everybody does know, we're in the process of approving a council to support us with that. In terms of the academic scorecard, a first draft was presented for the 14-15 goals developed. The formation committee met in August, and the draft is now being circulated. I know there was a survey that went out for feedback. Initially, the plan was to implement in September. The full committee now will be called back in September. We're going to do student surveys, and the goal ultimately was to publish mid-year results and have a second draft in December, publish our winter results in April, have a third draft, and then publish our full year performance and set goals for the 15-16 school year, and possibly tie that to administration performance. So that continues to be a work in progress. We've made good progress there. I don't know, Ms. Brooks, if you want to, or Mr. Klein, comment on that now. Or if there's any questions anybody has.
I mean, we're moving along.
Yeah, and I would say, say with pace. I mean, a lot of work's been done there.
Yeah.
And then the organizational review. This was initially planned to start in June to do a functional analysis of the organization. Given some of the work that we've been doing on the capital plan, the functional analysis was moved back to September. So the functional analysis and the succession planning will take place in September and October. The superintendent will provide a recommendation to the board in November, and we will look to implement that within January. And although we're 30, 45 days behind on that, Mr. Klein has confirmed with me that we'll still be able to deliver that to us on the appropriate timeline. So, the good news here is that of the 4 things that we're focused on through the course of the summer and the work of the committees and the people leading this initiatives, we've made really good progress, and we're in a position to deliver on these objectives, which will make it a better place. Any questions?
I mean, I think it's a good process for us to undergo, and I'm glad that we're sticking to it, and hopefully it'll become a useful habit.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our final public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for the public to address the board. We would ask that you limit your comments to no longer than 3 minutes. Please consider the fact that there may be young children watching the broadcast on CRTV. It is our goal to maintain a respectful environment so that members of the community have an equal opportunity to address the board without interruption. While the board welcomes your ideas and will consider them in deliberating an issue, we may not respond to your comments or questions. Please state your name and your town. Thank you.
I don't know if I can stay 4 inches from this and see that computer, but one thing that I was thinking about when everyone was talking earlier is that you've got really 3 factors that play against each other: modulars, academic standards, and capacity. If you put all your schools at their maximum capacity, when you go over, then you either have to throw out modulars or go over your academic standards. If you want to hold fast your academic standards and you don't want modulars, then you can't do that. So you got to think about those 3 factors and how they play against each other. Dr. Foster said something, I can't remember what it was, but it spurred me on this whole long thing. Ms. Brooks said, are the Schrader numbers accurate? They're accurate for Wrightstown. I think maybe we should ask the schools. Are they accurate? Because right now, Soul Finestone doesn't have trailers, but they got 2 free classrooms than what the Schrader analysis says. I looked just at general ed classrooms. We have in the north area, we talk about maybe just redistricting just the north area. If you did 5th and 6th grade centers at the north area, you have 94 classrooms, because kindergarten share classroom, 94 classrooms in those 4 schools in the north, and you got 94 and a half. In 2014, you used 94. You have exactly the same number of classrooms, not 90%, not 100%, classrooms to classrooms. You're full. You've got trailers at Wrightstown because you got capacity here and some excess capacity there. If you made a 5th and 6th grade center at Newtown Elementary, you would only need 89 and a half classrooms in that north area. You would save $617,000 a year by doing this, and you'd have 1 extra classroom in each school. Not enough to close a school, but enough to save money by concentrating the schools at different, concentrating the grades at different classes. You have a little bit harder in the south, because right now in the south, at the end of the year, using the data from recommendation 1 that was in the end, using their data, you had 118 and a half classrooms. Schrader says there are, in that south area, only 109 general ed classrooms. I think that's why you have more trailers in the south. So that's a little harder. But if you were to move things around and create 1 or 2 5th grade centers in the south, you could probably on average save about 2.75 classrooms, some years higher and lower, almost $400,000. So I just wanted to point all that out. I skipped through because now I'm down to 33 seconds. So I guess I'll end there. Right, you can't close a school, but you have enough room to move kids around and have fewer sections and get rid of most of your modulars. Did I get it? You can't close a school. You heard the point, right? Can't close a school. Okay, good. Thanks.
Do you need more time? Do you need more time?
I do need more time. I need about 30 minutes.
I'll relinquish my time if you need more time. I'll relinquish my time if you need it.
Well, thank you. So see how generous our community is?
We try to be. Paul DeRusso from Newtown. So I spoke at the initial meeting, and I just want to make one quick observation. When this subject first came up a number of months ago, I heard several board members mention that the intent was not to close schools. That was a point that many of you were adamant about making. Why do we still hear this as a subject? I just want to make the point, and I'll be brief, and I don't need a full 3 minutes. Why are you not talking about options? I still hear this whole point about we have a few extra classrooms. Let me ask you something, too, for all of you to consider. Does that harm students? Is it bad when a class is small? I think it's bad when the class is big. I think we all agree on that. So why is it bad when the class is small? So let me ask you again, why are you not looking at options to offset the costs in ways that are a bit more creative, maybe more difficult than just deciding to close a school or to move kids around? But that's the only point I wanted to make. Thank you.
It is cold in here. I had to go out and get a coat. Nancy Carroll, Newtown Borough. Look, Wendy's shivering. I would appreciate it if you would put up the board goals for the committee, because I don't think people understand what our goals were. If you would put that on the web, please.
It's on the Q&A. So
okay, as well as the current, where the elementary schools go. I asked for that last time. Okay, first of all, I want to apologize to the woman who did this spreadsheet, because I never thought that anyone would take a total enrollment of 4 schools and subtract that from the peak and existing and Schrader to get what is called an available seats, because you can't get available seats that way. That's a much, you can get how many students less you have, but you can't get available seats. That's a much more complicated situation, and it has to do with efficiencies of classrooms and efficiencies of scale. So I'm going to give you an example. There's a class of 12. That's all of you. I mean, there's 12 people in the class, but your max is 15. So you say, I got 3 seats left. Then guess who moves in? These 3 people move in. You have no seats left in your classroom. But you say, this guy over here, he must be pretty good. He's going to be in our class. We just gave him a raise. So he comes into your max size of 15. Now you got 16, and you got to break into 2 sections. You thought you had 3 left, but when you break into those 2 sections, you have 2 classes of 8, and you have 7 seats left in each one of those sections. So that's how you get efficiencies of scale and availability, and it goes from building to building. Now, the other thing about efficiencies of classrooms are that just like in your home, if you have an empty nester and your kids start moving out and going to college, and if you had to in a room, one kid takes over the room, finally something's empty, parents get an office, it goes on. You could take any of those schools that have 200 or 400 left and walk around, and I bet you're going to find most of those spaces are occupied, but they're not occupied efficiently. Anybody in the building says, oh, I'll have that little desk that's not occupied, even if they're support staff. So it's to get available classrooms doesn't mean the number left over after the decline. It's more complicated, which is why I appreciate those board members who wanted to see what that's going to look like. Because that tool they gave us doesn't tell us what grade everybody is in. So we don't know how many from Wrightstown are in this grade or that grade or whatever to find out exactly how the sections are going to break. And that is very important. Then real quickly, I'd like to thank, I think with that board goals, are you teasing me? You told me that one of the goals was going to be take off trailers. I went into a meeting. You were teasing me because you know that is so important. And that is not
Can I
a goal.
clarify? I don't usually do this, but so facility planning was a board goal. The subset of the facility planning was to get trailers off.
Okay, because I didn't see it up there at all.
Facility planning.
Okay.
Sorry.
I
just wanted to not question
Okay, because that was in the goals for the committee. Okay.
Yeah.
Because, well, then will that get a timeline? Never mind. I'm not going to be able to come on Saturday, and I just wanted to thank all those board members who asked for information so that they can make a decision. I really appreciate it, and I thank you for trying to get on something that you can agree, and I have to publicly apologize to the committee I was on because I'm going to back down from something I agreed to. I agreed with the rest of the committee to do both schools if they could be done simultaneously, the middle schools, thinking we were going to save money to pay for it by closing the school. So if we're not going to save money and we're going to charge the taxpayers, I'm going to back down from that. And my position is that we should do Holland as quickly as possible first and get that school off to save the money and then do Newtown. So I'm sorry, but I can't fully back that if it doesn't happen.
My name's Jackie Leeser. I'm from Wrightstown. I'm not going to go into a lot of numbers. I'm just kind of here to speak from the heart. First, I want to let you know that I'm in education, and I commend you for all the work that you do. It's a thankless job, and it's one of the situations that we're in. But again, we're working towards maintaining the excellence that Council Rock has earned. I'm a graduate. I went through Rolling Hills, Holland, and Council Rock. I was there at the pods. I actually watched your YouTube videos from beginning to end. This is the first board meeting I've been able to attend. But I was at the pods. I was one of the kids in the open classrooms. But I have to say that I don't feel that one model fits all. Class size is important, and in one proposal or one board member had mentioned something about a flat number, and I have to say that that, again, doesn't fit all, especially in circumstances when it comes to special education. Wrightstown parents care. We're really passionate. The quality of our education has been excellent, and that's what we've been provided. Like I said, I did go to Rolling Hills. The system in Wrightstown works. It's a blue ribbon school. It's proven to work. It's met that excellence. And it's one of the only elementary schools that I know of in the district that have achieved that. So that model has proven to work. Again, with the whole one plan fits all, you have to remember that a system like Rolling Hills and the open pod situation doesn't meet the standards for all children when it comes to IEPs. So, I mean, I know that that's a great environment, but when you're considering special education, it doesn't meet needs of all of those children. These meetings are really long. This is the first opportunity I've had. And I think that a lot of the items don't pertain necessarily to the closing of Wrightstown. And I think that that's the reason why you don't see as many people in the community here. If Saturday's meeting is specifically to address that one particular proposal, I think you'll see more people. I also want to mention the board member who said that they wanted more community members to come out. And I think he was talking about, like, Wrightstown, if it's important to you, you wanted to see us here. I just want to mention that I represent 4 of the students within Wrightstown, so the numbers are somewhat skewed sometimes if you think about it, and a lot of other families fit that mold where there's 3 or 4 children, so you're not going to see as many parents. And lastly, I just want to say I work for a small school district, which fortunately has a board that really leaves the planning for individualized students' education to the educators. And Mr. Klein, I have to say, I listened to your proposal, and I think that, you know, the board, you guys entrusted him. You hired him. Not he hires the teachers, but you hired him. So I believe that your proposal or your recommendation was because you know what's best for the school district. So I really do hope that you consider that, because it's coming from someone who knows Council Rock better than probably anybody else in this room. Thank you.
Amy with Newtown. I wanted to comment on, there's been a couple of comments over the past 2 weeks about how there was just an arrow showing where the Wrightstown kids would go, and it doesn't show the complexity of the software. And when you use all that, that's kind of how, like, at least 60 kids got lost in one of the proposals. So I kind of like that we just used an arrow so that we know all the kids are accounted for. I heard a couple of board members say that they would like to see modeled how to close an elementary school in 2016, and I would like to know what you think will be different about our district landscape if it's not appropriate to close an elementary school this year, and we're likely seeing stabilization, if not student enrollment increase in elementary schools. Why would it then all of a sudden become a good idea the following year? And Nancy kind of brought up what I really think this is all about, is that we need to do some really expensive work at the middle schools. And we want to give a perceived savings to the public because it is suggested that we think about raising taxes nominally 7 years in a row to fund the middle school bills if we do it simultaneously. I would agree, if we're not going to do it simultaneously, go with the school where you can close the school and get some savings out of it. But the fact of the matter is, closing a school should be the last option. And Jenny found an awesome option that gets us savings immediately, requires almost no upfront costs whatsoever, and the savings are so substantial that you wouldn't even have to raise any taxes to do these middle school builds. So if our concern is savings, these are real savings. They're not pretend savings that cost money and you see the savings in 15 years after the renovations you did need to be re-renovated. This is real savings right now. And, you know, talking about the detailed conversation you just had about sections and breaking, the efficiencies happen when you concentrate the grades. And you have more kindergartners together, and you have more 5th graders together, and 6th grade. That's how you eliminate sections. And that's what Jenny figured out for this district in a way that has an impact that is shared across the district and isn't just shutting down a school for a small rural community in our district. So I really appreciate the work that Jenny also did, and it was Jerry Grupp's idea. It was absolutely Jerry Grupp's idea, and you know, and she
Blame him.
And she considered all of the things that you all say about utilization, and there's vacancies here and there's trailers there, and it's addressed in a really cool plan, and all the schools stay open educating our kids. So we want savings too. We don't, but we want it to be real, and we want our school to stay open and teach our kids.
Meeting adjourned.
No.
No.
Board comment.
Sorry. Board, I thought board had plenty of time to comment tonight, but okay then.
Sorry.
All right, you both can. It's
Real-
shockingly.
Mine's real simple.
Go ahead,
Come as
Mr.
no
Rupp.
surprise. If you like the last idea, I want to make...
This is what we need.
No, I want to make y'all aware. I know it's a really minor point. I don't know how many people use Amazon. I would imagine quite a few. I would encourage everyone, please, go to the smile.amazon.com feature if you already use Amazon. Within that structure, you can pick a charity that will receive 0.5% of all your purchases on Amazon. Council Rock School, if you put in Council Rock, you'll find the Council Rock School District is one of those charities. You'll also find the Council Rock Coalition for Healthy Youth is one. There are many. Pick one. But every dollar you spend, I know it's only a nickel. Is it a nickel? Yeah, it's 50 cents. It's $1, so it's 1/2 of 1%. But you know what? It's money that you're spending anyhow.
Right.
Toss it up there. I'd also like to put out a question, which is many of the religious organizations in the area, or have in other areas, have a program with various supermarkets where you buy script, and you buy $100. I was in Pittsburgh visiting my family. You buy $100 worth of script, and you give them $100. And what happens is they give 5% of that to the charity that you picked. So you have a gift card for $100. You go to the local supermarket and you buy it. Do we as a school district participate in any of those script programs? Have we
Years ago, some of the PTOs,
have we as a district looked at that? It's not going to let us save a school just on what we're buying on groceries, but it's money. And so I put the question out, if we don't do it, can we do it?
We've deferred that, Mr. Krupp, almost entirely to PTOs and other organizations.
Well, that's
The amount
fine.
of money that that comes from it is, sat in a number of PTO meetings, is relatively small.
I hear you say it, and the reason I say that is because it's going on the PTO level. And 70% of the community doesn't have kids in the school, so they're not participating in the PTO level. So my question is, how do we put it out there and create a program with any of the, because if we can get 70%, if we get 1% of the 70%, it's still better, because those people don't have, they're not working for the school district, they're not giving it to the PTO. Their interest is going to be, gee, if I give a couple extra bucks I'm spending anyhow, how do I bring the taxes down? So can I put it out as a question that we can, maybe I'll have to do it, but the question is, how do we do it? And how do we publicize it? Because it's an avenue for funds. It's untapped. Why would we not do it?
I didn't think we were, but I understand the question. I didn't think we were permitted to get funds that way, but.
Are we not,
I asked,
look at the.
he told me not to ask. I was like, aren't we restricted? That's what I thought a long time ago. I could be wrong.
I'm not going to answer that one off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Okay,
he'll
would
do
you
research, he'll let us know.
let us know so that then we can
Good idea on
do
Amazon.
something?
Mrs. Sexton.
So, on September 30th, from 7 o'clock till 8:45 at the Bucks County IU, there is a video conference on Pennsylvania basic education funding. Come out, find out how schools are truly funded by the state of Pennsylvania. Find out these things. Join with hundreds of school leaders from every corner of PA who will gather to learn about the statewide coalition campaigning for a new, adequate, and equitable public funding formula. Begin planning with your regional colleagues on how to take action locally to build support for new school funding. Learn the facts about the current state of funding in Pennsylvania and what is required to support students and schools elsewhere and everywhere in the Commonwealth. Meet with local leaders for the basic education funding campaign. There is some research that said Pennsylvania funds its schools 46th out of the funding. There's 50 states, we're 46th in support for basic education. So instead of just bringing in monies from groceries, supports churches.
Get where you can.
Let's try and get back some of the money we send to Harrisburg for us. We send quite a bit there. We don't get anything, hardly anything from the federal government. We really ought to be camping out on the steps of the Capitol because we get bumpkins. You don't want to camp out?
It's
I believe he wants to speak.
It's
Dr. Foster, do you want to
The
speak?
Yiddish lesson for today is it's bumpkus.
Are you-
All right, anyhow, this is a free event. Anybody is invited to go.
What time?
7 o'clock, Bucks County IU. They would appreciate it if you would probably call them. And you just call the Bucks County Intermediate Unit number 22. It's up in Doylestown. There's a phone number. Ask who you speak to about the Pennsylvania Basic Education Funding Campaign. You can have a seat in the room. You can watch the video conference with everybody else. Learn, learn, learn.
If we give it to Mr. Klein, he'll get it out to,
I'll get it from Dr. Glass tomorrow.
You'll get more?
I'll get it from Dr. Glass.
electronically, so we can send it out.
Yeah, so we'll put it on the listserv.
Dr. Foster?
Thanks. I had a quick request. So MBIT, before we had done a focus group with the kids that went there, and we got some good information about that. I just wanted to make sure we did that again this year. So if we could have a plan to do that, to go back.
That's fine.
So the MBIT students, a couple of years ago, we had a focus group, and we asked them, it was at South, right?
We did it at both North and South.
Okay.
We talked to kids.
So if we could do that again and see if they have any ideas or suggestions about their program, because I think one of the things that came out of that was really helpful was the coordination of the schedules across the districts, and that has been done this year and I think last year, and it's made a big difference for the kids. So that was, if we could do that again. And I'd love to come.
Any other comments?
I just want to say that at our next meeting, October 2nd, there's an academic standards meeting at 6 o'clock. The topic that night is high school scheduling, high school courses that aren't running, the shuttles, and a review of high school grading. There's been some conversation about pluses and minuses and things. So it's all things high school, and encourage everybody to come.
And I think normally there'd be committee reports. I know you had academic standards tonight. It was a very good meeting. I don't know if you want to give a brief.
Yeah, actually, it was a great meeting. There was, for academic standards, there was a good turnout from the public, where we talked about the elementary report card and full-day kindergarten. Basically, the net takeaway was that there was good dialogue, and the administration is going to go back and look at what the Bucks County schools, what other districts are doing in terms of full-day kindergarten, and for the ones that have recently implemented it, what did that path to implementation look like? So that we can get an understanding, because I think we're all in agreement, even if we were to move forward philosophically with a full-day kindergarten, the cost and space issues to implement that in 10 schools across the board would be challenging. Most of the other school districts have done it sort of in, piecemeal, in smaller increments. So just to get an understanding of what that would look like, we wanted to not reinvent the wheel, look at what other districts have done, see if they can share what, the lessons learned were. So Joy and I will work about how to appropriately inform and how that information gets shared. But that is the next step, and I'll report back on that at another time.
Okay, see everybody.
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Ballard?
I just want to comment on that, and you probably know this already, Mark, but Neshaminy just went through this
Yeah.
process. You talked about it at the meeting. I wasn't there. Okay.
What about
Okay.
Scotland? Anyone want to say anything?
See
No?
everybody
Okay.
Saturday morning, 9 a.m., bright and early. Meeting adjourned.
That's the dress code.
Oh, I'm sorry, the dress code is casual. Right? Casual. You wear a pair of jeans, it doesn't really.
It's only a few
He won't let you,
counties.
but I will.
Right now, the no's are leading, but it's a small minority of the vote.